Chapter 644. The Nangong Yan was unwilling to leave the Fonghua Mountains because he wanted to go to the Saint's Mausoleum. After all, this was a great opportunity. No one would be willing to give it up just like that. However, it had been almost half a month since the Nangong Yan was captured. Now that the jade pendants needed to open the Saint's Mausoleum had been gathered, how could Su Tianzi not open the Saint's Mausoleum? Facing Xiao Chen's doubts and questions, the Nangong Yan replied without hesitation. Impossible. Su Tianzi can't open the Saint's Mausoleum now. Why? The Nangong Yan's answer was very certain. Hearing this, Xiao Chen asked. Because according to the information in the jade pendants, in order to open the Saint's Mausoleum, not only do you need to gather 2 jade pendants, but you also need to open it on the night of the full moon. In the past half a month, there hasn't been a full moon. I've checked before. The nearest full moon is 2 days later, so Su Tianzi can't open the Saint's Mausoleum now. Since the Nangong Yan had already told everyone, there was no need to hide it anymore. Hearing this, Xiao Chen nodded slightly. If this was the case, then Su Tianzi really couldn't open the Saint's Mausoleum. In other words, Xiao Chen and the others still had a chance to go to the Saint's Mausoleum and compete with Su Tianzi for the inheritance of the Saint's Mausoleum. In the face of such a heaven-defying opportunity, everyone present was excited, but no one spoke. Everyone looked at Xiao Chen, waiting for Xiao Chen's decision. Sensing everyone's gaze, Xiao Chen pondered for a moment, then smiled and said, "In that case, let's go and take a look. Since the meat is already in front of us, I think you guys won't be satisfied if you don't take a bite." Since they were sure that the Saint's Mausoleum had not been opened yet, they naturally had to fight for it. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, everyone was immediately delighted and smiled. Since they had decided to go to the Saint's Mausoleum to take a look, Xiao Chen asked about the Saint's Mausoleum. According to the Nangong Yan, the entrance of the Saint's Mausoleum was located in the north of the Fonghua mountain range. It wasn't far from where they were now, but it wasn't close either, the Saint's Mausoleums. So it could only be open on a full moon, and every saint in the history of the Tiana continent was definitely recorded, and it was impossible for them to be nameless. That was why Xiao Chen asked Nangong Yan who the owner of the holy mausoleum was. But in the face of Xiao Chen's question, the Nangong Yan shook his head this time, indicating that he didn't know, because the content of the jade pendant didn't mention the identity of the Saint's Mausoleum's owner. He didn't know who the owner of the Saint's Mausoleum was. Moreover, the Nangong Yan had checked some ancient books, but there was no record of the Saint's Mausoleum in the Fonghua mountain range, so he couldn't find any clues. "You don't know who left it?" In the face of Gu Lingyao's answer, Xiao Chen whispered softly. Then, without saying anything more, he led the group towards the Saint's Mausoleum. This time, the group didn't rush. After all, there was plenty of time. Moreover, rushing would consume a lot of energy. In order to deal with the Saint's Mausoleum, Xiao Chen hoped that everyone could be in good condition. Only then could they face the possible threats in the Saint's Mausoleum. It could be said that this was Xiao Chen's first time coming into contact with the Saint's Mausoleum. Previously, in the Tianqian continent and the Tianqi sect, Xiao Chen had seen Xiao Sheng and Xu Feng's remnant soul, but that wasn't their mausoleum. Therefore, along the way, Xiao Chen also asked the Nangong Yan a lot about the Saint's Mausoleum. The Nangong Yan obviously knew more about the Saint's Mausoleum than Xiao Chen. According to her, every Saint's Mausoleum was an independent space. After all, when one reached the Saint realm, one would have a preliminary grasp of the power of space. Using the power of law, one could construct an independent space. Therefore, under normal circumstances, when a saint fell, they would use their entire life's strength to construct a small world as their resting place after death. At the same time, in this small world, many saints would also leave behind tests and opportunities, as well as their own inheritances for future generations to obtain. After all, no one would want their abilities to disappear just like that. Passing the tests would allow one to obtain the opportunities and inheritances left behind by the saint. In general, the saint's mausoleum mainly depended on the saint's personality. Some saints had a gentle personality, so the mausoleum they left behind would basically not be dangerous. Some would only be some tests. However, if one encountered a mausoleum left behind by a saint with a tyrannical or eccentric personality, then it was hard to say. It might be filled with difficulties, or it might be filled with danger at every step. Therefore, the Nangong didn't dare to be certain about the saint's mausoleum that everyone was about to head to. After all, she didn't know who the owner of the saint's mausoleum was and had no way of knowing the saint's personality. From the layout of the saint's mausoleum, one could tell the saint's personality when he was alive. This was something that Xiaochen didn't deny. After walking and stopping for a day, Xiaochen and the others finally arrived at a place not far from the saint's mausoleum under the command of Nangong. Not rashly approaching the saint's mausoleum, Xiaochen had everyone find a secluded place to rest. Now that the 2 jade pendants were in the hands of Su Tianzi, they couldn't let Su Tianzi discover their tracks at this time. After all, they still needed to rely on Su Tianzi to open the saint's mausoleum. As for snatching the jade pendants in Su Tianzi's hands, Xiaochen had also considered this point, but it wasn't realistic. First of all, Su Tianzi was the 7th direct disciple of Tianyua's sacred sect, so he definitely wasn't an idiot. Regardless of whether or not they could defeat him, if they acted rashly, it was very likely that they would alert the enemy and even cause trouble. If the matter of the saint's mausoleum was exposed, then things would become even more troublesome. Therefore, according to Xiaochen's plan, everyone only needed to hide nearby and not be discovered by Su Tianzi or his subordinates. When Su Tianzi opened the saint's mausoleum, Xiaochen and the others would appear and directly enter the saint's mausoleum. Because at that time, the entrance to the saint's mausoleum would have already opened, and even if Su Tianzi discovered them, he wouldn't have any way to stop them. Moreover, Xiaochen firmly believed that as long as Su Tianzi wasn't an idiot, after the entrance to the saint's mausoleum opened, he wouldn't stop them even if he watched them enter. Even if they wanted to fight, they could only fight inside the saint's mausoleum. It was impossible for a battle to break out outside. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 645. There was less than a day left before the full moon that Nangong had mentioned. According to Xiaochen's instructions, everyone did not act rashly. Instead, they waited quietly in place, waiting for Su Tianzi to open the saint's mausoleum. While adjusting their breathing and waiting for the saint's mausoleum to open, Nangong took the initiative to approach Xiaochen and Guling Yao. She first glanced at Guling Yao. In fact, Nangong already knew that Guling Yao was a woman disguised as a man. Wait, how could a man be so delicate and pretty? Moreover, a woman's intuition was very accurate. As soon as she saw Guling Yao, Nangong's intuition told her that Guling Yao was a woman. Smiling at Guling Yao, Nangong looked at Xiaochen and asked, "Are you sure that if we continue to wait like this, we will definitely be able to enter the saint's mausoleum?" "I'm sure." Hearing this, Xiaochen slowly opened his eyes and smiled. "Why?" Nangong asked. "It's very simple. Su Tianzi still doesn't know that you've successfully escaped danger, so he won't be on guard against you. In this way, he will definitely open the saint's mausoleum on the full moon as planned because Su Tianzi knows that the Qingma gang can't hold you for too long. Therefore, this time, Su Tianzi must open the saint's mausoleum. Otherwise, when you escape danger, who can guarantee that you won't spread the news of the saint's mausoleum to vent your anger? If Su Tianzi still hasn't obtained the opportunity and inheritance in the saint's mausoleum, then wouldn't he be in big trouble?" Xiaochen replied. Hearing this, Nangong nodded in agreement, but soon asked, "Even if you're right and Su Tianzi opens the saint's mausoleum according to plan, how can you guarantee that he won't choose to fight to the death with us when the time comes?" "That's even simpler. If we fight to the death outside the holy mausoleum, what if the shockwaves from the battle attract other people? Wouldn't that increase the number of competitors for no reason? Moreover, if they were to fight to the death outside the sacred spirit world, what would they do if an accident happened and the entrance closed? Su Tianzi will not gamble in the holy tomb, so he can only watch us enter the holy tomb. Even if he is angry, he can only vent it in the holy tomb." Xiaochen said. Everything had been predicted by Xiaochen. while chatting with Xiaochen, the sky gradually darkened. Night fell, and a full moon hung high in the sky. Looking at the full moon in the sky, Xiaochen got up, patted the dust off his clothes, and turned to the crowd with a smile. "Let's go, it's time to act. As usual, pay attention to hiding. Before the entrance to the holy tomb is fully opened, we cannot expose our existence." Hearing Xiaochen's words, the 12 Tianfengxingzong disciples, as well as the 2 women, Guling Yao and Nangong Yan, all got up one after another. Then, under Xiaochen's lead, the group carefully walked towards the entrance of the holy tomb. Because they could not be discovered by Su Tianzi, Xiaochen's group did not move quickly. It took them more than half an hour to reach the entrance of the holy tomb. Hiding in the bushes, Xiaochen looked at the entrance of the holy mausoleum that Nangong Yan had mentioned. At this time, the entrance of the holy mausoleum did not seem to be anything special. However, Xiaochen saw more than 10 young people standing around the entrance quietly. These people were wearing very ordinary clothes, but Xiaochen was sure that they were all disciples of the Tianyue sacred sect. In the middle of the crowd, a handsome young man stood proudly. Seeing this person, Nangong Yan whispered to Xiaochen, "He is Su Tianzi." This handsome young man was Su Tianzi. Hearing Nangong Yan's words, Xiaochen looked at Su Tianzi with interest. Previously, Nangong Yan had also introduced Su Tianzi to Xiaochen. Although this person was now only the 7th pro-disciple of the Tianyue sacred sect, he was known as the strongest genius in the history of the Tianyue sacred sect. With such a reputation, of course, it was not groundless. Nangong Yan had also secretly investigated Su Tianzi's experience. Regarding this, Nangong Yan could not help but admire him. Su Tianzi was only 27 years old this year, the same age as Xiaochen. In just 2 years after entering the Tianyue sacred sect, Su Tianzi had already become the 7th pro-disciple of the Tianyue sacred sect. It could be said that since Su Tianzi was a child, he had been progressing triumphantly, surpassing his peers one by one. Even after joining the Tianyue holy sect, Su Tianzi was like a shining new star, quickly blooming his own brilliance in the face of the geniuses of the holy sect. In the Tianyue sacred sect, more than one elder had evaluated Su Tianzi like this. If this child does not fall, he may become the holy son in the future. To be able to become the holy son, this evaluation was already high enough. Some people even predicted that in less than 3 years, Su Tianzi would certainly rush into the top 3 pro-disciples of the Tianyue sacred sect. This was a person who was doted on by thousands. At the same time, his brilliance overshadowed countless disciples of the Tianyue sacred sect. Even the other pro-disciples would be overshadowed by Su Tianzi. Finally, he saw the true appearance of the person who was known as the strongest genius in the history of the Tianyue sacred sect. He secretly sized up Su Tianzi. Facing Su Tianzi, Xiaochen honestly felt that this person was indeed not simple. His temperament was very strong. Moreover, his eyes were bright and full of expression. His ink-like black hair danced in the wind. Purely based on appearance, this Su Tianzi was indeed a talent. Of course, Xiaochen was more concerned about his cultivation. They were the same age, but Su Tianzi had already reached the minor success of the Dao validation realm. Such a cultivation was indeed rare. Moreover, Xiaochen was sure that Su Tianzi's cultivation was 100% cultivated step by step by himself. He had never relied on the power of elixirs, and his foundation was extremely solid. In the face of any pro-disciple of the sacred sect, one did not need to doubt whether their cultivation was fake, because no pro-disciple would do such a stupid thing. For the sake of a quick breakthrough in cultivation, damaging one's own martial arts foundation was something that a personal disciple would never do. Even if pro-disciples wanted to break through, they would constantly suppress it and repeatedly condense it until they really reached the limit. Only then would they choose to break through. After secretly sizing up Su Tianzi and waiting patiently for nearly an hour, Su Tianzi, who was not far away, looked up at the full moon in the sky, and then said to the person next to him, "We can begin." After speaking, Su Tianzi took out 2 ancient jade pendants from his storage ring. Seeing these 2 jade pendants, Nangong Yan's eyes flashed with a fiery light. Su Tianzi is about to open the sacred tomb. Don't worry, wait until he completely opens the entrance to the sacred tomb, then we will act. Hearing Nangong Yan's words, Xiaochen whispered, indicating that she should not be anxious. A cooked duck cannot fly away. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 646. Sensing that Nangong Yan was a little agitated, Xiaochen gestured for her to calm down. Su Tianzi was preparing to open the holy mausoleum. This was the most crucial moment, and they couldn't let him feel anything wrong. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Nangong Yan nodded slightly. Then, she held her breath and stared at the two jade pendants in Su Tianzi's hands. Perhaps it was because he was too confident in himself, or perhaps it was because Su Tianzi believed that Nangong Yan was still in the hands of the Qingma gang. Furthermore, he had sent 3 Biming family experts to take charge of the array. Therefore, Su Tianzi did not suspect anything and directly chose to open the holy mausoleum. Su Tianzi held the 2 halves of the jade pendants in each hand and slowly put them together. As the 2 halves of the jade pendants merged into one, a gust of wind blew. In front of Su Tianzi, 2 stone pillars rose from the ground as if they had grown out of the ground. The stone pillars were not very tall, only 3 meters tall. However, they were completely black and gave off an extremely sinister feeling as soon as they appeared. Following the appearance of the 2 stone pillars, Su Tianzi's eyes flashed with a smile. With a wave of his hand, the jade pendant in his hand shot directly towards the middle of the 2 stone pillars. What was strange was that when the jade pendant flew to the empty space between the 2 stone pillars, it seemed to be embedded in the pillar and stopped steadily in the air. The jade pendant stopped firmly in the middle of the 2 stone pillars. Soon, the 2 stone pillars emitted a faint black light. This black light was like ink, continuously extending and finally connecting the 2 stone pillars. At the same time, a black door that flowed like liquid appeared in the middle of the 2 stone pillars. This was the entrance to the holy mausoleum. Now that the entrance had been opened, the corners of Su Tianzi's mouth rose slightly, revealing a faint smile. Everyone, follow me into the holy mausoleum. With that, Su Tianzi prepared to enter the holy mausoleum. At the same time, Xiaochen led Gu Lingyao and the others out of the bushes, a faint smile on his face. This must be senior martial brother Su Tianzi. Hearing the sudden voice, Su Tianzi and the others immediately turned their heads to look. The more than 10 people of the Tianyua sacred sect took out their weapons and stared at Xiaochen and the others as if they were facing a great enemy. Su Tianzi's face turned ugly when so many people suddenly appeared. However, when he saw the Nangong Yan, Su Tianzi sneered instead. Miss Nangong, I didn't expect you to be able to escape. Why? Is senior martial brother Su disappointed that I escaped? Hearing Su Tianzi's words, the Nangong Yan sneered. It's not that I'm disappointed, just a little surprised. With the smile on his face, Su Tianzi replied, then turned his gaze to Xiaochen. He also saw that the Nangong Yan group was led by Xiaochen. He sneered. Who is this friend? A disciple of the Tianfeng Xingzong? Xiaochen of the Tianfeng Xingzong. Senior martial brother Su is too polite. Seeing this, Xiaochen said with a smile. Oh, so it's junior martial brother Xiaochen. Why? Is junior martial brother Xiaochen also interested in the holy mausoleum? Of course. Who wouldn't be interested in the holy mausoleum? Moreover, it's better to enjoy it together than to enjoy it alone. Since we've met senior martial brother Su these past few days, why don't we explore the holy mausoleum together? Ha! Hearing Xiaochen's words, Su Tianzi laughed loudly. The conversation between the two was like a meeting between friends, without the slightest killing intent or anger. Accompanied by Su Tianzi's laughter, a Tianyua sacred sect disciple beside him shouted coldly. Humph, who do you think you are to enter the holy mausoleum with us? I'll give you 3 breaths of time. If you don't scram, then die here. Naturally, he didn't want Xiaochen and the others to enter the holy mausoleum. After hearing the Tianyua sacred sect disciple's words, Xiaochen completely ignored him and didn't even look at him. His gaze was always on Su Tianzi. What? Senior Marshal Brother Su doesn't want us to enter the Holy Mausoleum? If that's the case, then we'll have to go all out. The opportunity is right in front of us. As the saying goes, cutting off one's opportunity is like killing one's father. In that case, we can only go all out. Humph, who do you think you are to say that? If you want to fight, then let's fight. Do you think we're afraid of you? Hearing Xiao Chen's words, the Tianyue sacred sect disciple once again snorted coldly. At the same time, he took a step forward and got into a fighting stance. It was obvious that this Tianyue sacred sect disciple should be a core disciple. His strength wasn't weak, but that was it. As this person's voice fell, Su Tianzi's laughter also slowly dissipated. Staring at Xiao Chen, Su Tianzi's eyes flashed a cold light. You really dare to fight with me? Of course not. As the saying goes, people die for wealth and birds die for food. For this heaven-defying opportunity, what's there to be afraid of? Xiao Chen replied with a smile. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Su Tianzi went silent. At this time, the Tianyue sacred sect core disciple's patience had obviously reached its limit. Just as he was about to make a move, he was stopped by Su Tianzi. Stop! Senior Brother Su, they. After being stopped by Su Tianzi, the core disciple said with a puzzled look. But before he could speak, Su Tianzi waved his hand and interrupted him. Don't say any more. Just as Xiao Chen thought, Su Tianzi couldn't make a move here. For Su Tianzi, nothing was more important than the opportunity in the Holy Mausoleum. After preparing for so long, Su Tianzi absolutely wouldn't allow the slightest accident to happen at this final juncture. Therefore, in the face of Xiao Chen and the others, Su Tianzi's only choice was to let them enter the Holy Mausoleum and then deal with them. After a slight warning, the coldness in Su Tianzi's eyes quickly dissipated. A smile once again appeared on his face and he said, in that case, let's go together. But Junior Brother Xiao, the Holy Mausoleum is full of danger. If any accident happens, you may not be able to come out. So Junior Brother Xiao should think twice before you act. That's all I have to say. Junior Brother Xiao, think about it yourself. We'll take our leave first. Forcefully resisting the urge to kill Xiao Chen and the others, Su Tianzi's voice faded. Without waiting for Xiao Chen's reply, he led his people and strode through the black door. Watching Su Tianzi and the others leave, Xiao Chen naturally didn't take the threat just now to heart. With a slight smile, Xiao Chen said to the people behind him. Let's go, we'll go in too. With that said, Xiao Chen took the lead, Gu Lingyao and Nan Gongyan flanked him on the left and right, while the 12 Tianfeng Xingzong disciples followed behind. The group also entered the Holy Mausoleum through the black door. As everyone entered, the black door leading to the Holy Mausoleum soon disappeared, along with the 2 jade pendants. Everything returned to normal, as if no one had been here at all. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 647. The originally hostile parties entered the Holy Mausoleum one after another and everything soon returned to normal. No one knew that this was actually the entrance to a saint's mausoleum. Passing through the black door, Xiao Chen and the others felt as if they had traveled through space. When their vision recovered, they were already inside the Holy Mausoleum. In the distance was a huge black volcano. From the top of the volcano, magma would spurt out from time to time. The ground looked as if it had been burned by magma all year round, dried up and cracked. The sky was also gray, and even if there were some trees, only their trunks were left, almost dead. Xiao Chen didn't expect the inside of the Holy Mausoleum to be such a scene. However, Xiao Chen obviously didn't have much time to pay attention to this because Su Tianzi and the others were in front of Xiao Chen. Obviously, Su Tianzi had deliberately waited here for Xiao Chen. Outside the Holy Mausoleum, Su Tianzi couldn't make a move, but now it was different. Everyone had entered the Holy Mausoleum and the entrance was closed. No matter how much they fought, no one would discover them. Su Tianzi's eyes flashed with a strong killing intent as he looked at Xiao Chen with a sneer and said indifferently, Junior brother Xiao, I already said that the holy mausoleum is full of danger, but it seems that you didn't listen to me. Su Tianzi's words were full of killing intent and threat, but in response, Xiaochen just smiled and said, as the saying goes, people die for wealth and birds die for food. Even if there is a threat, I can't just give up on this opportunity in front of me. Oh, I'm afraid junior brother won't have a chance. This place will eventually become your burial ground. Su Tianzi said directly, no longer needing to hide his intentions. Su Tianzi had coveted this holy mausoleum for a long time and no one could snatch it from him. Therefore, when Xiao Chen and the others appeared, Su Tianzi had already decided that as long as Xiao Chen and the others dared to step into the holy mausoleum, they would be killed without mercy. Moreover, no one knew about the existence of this holy mausoleum. If he killed Xiao Chen, Nangong Yan, and the others here, even if the family Nangong and Tianfeng Xingzong wanted to investigate, they couldn't. As long as Su Tianzi killed the remaining members of the Qingma gang one by one, there would be no evidence. Therefore, Su Tianzi didn't have any worries. Su Tianzi already had murderous intent in his heart. Xiaochen had expected this, so he did not panic in the slightest. At the same time, the others behind the two of them drew their weapons one after another. A great battle was about to break out. The atmosphere became more and more tense. After a few breaths, along with Su Tianzi's low shout, the people of Tianyua's sacred sect directly chose to attack. In this regard, Nangong Yan, Guling Yao, and the others naturally wouldn't allow themselves to be captured without a fight. Nangong Yan and Guling Yao dealt with the two core disciples of Tianyua's sacred sect. Everyone immediately began to fight. Obviously, Su Tianzi wanted to directly kill Xiao Chen and the others here. Watching the outbreak of the battle, Su Tianzi's body gradually emitted a terrifying aura. The killing intent in his eyes continued to gather, and his aura continued to rise. He sneered and said, "You, a mere core disciple, dare to ruin my plans? Today is the day you and your group die." Su Tianzi knew the top 10 core disciples of Tianfeng Xingzong. Xiao Chen wasn't among them, so Su Tianzi naturally thought that Xiao Chen was a core disciple of Tianfeng Xingzong. Of course, Su Tianzi obviously hadn't heard that He Chushuan had been killed by Xiao Chen. At the same time, Xiao Chen had become the 10th direct disciple of Tianfeng Xingzong. Su Tianzi didn't wait for Xiao Chen's reply. He didn't want to give Xiao Chen any chance at all. He directly shot out a palm without holding back. A giant palm formed by spiritual power immediately fell from the sky and fiercely suppressed Xiao Chen. "Ant, go to hell." Annihilation Palm. Su Tianzi used an upper-grade earth-level martial arts technique right from the start, and it had already reached the level of perfection. The giant palm that covered the sky seemed to want to crush Xiao Chen into pieces. Facing Su Tianzi's annihilation palm, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that even the top core disciple wouldn't be able to withstand it. Therefore, Su Tianzi was very confident that his palm could definitely kill Xiao Chen on the spot. However, facing Su Tianzi's confident attack, Xiao Chen's expression didn't change at all. Facing the annihilation palm that was falling from the sky, Xiao Chen directly used the Tai sword finger. Seeing that Xiao Chen actually chose to resist his annihilation palm, Su Tianzi coldly snorted and said, "Humph, you're courting death." Su Tianzi naturally didn't believe that Xiao Chen could withstand his annihilation palm. If Xiao Chen wasn't a pro-disciple, Xiao Chen wouldn't even be qualified to fight with him. As Su Tianzi's voice fell, the two attacks fiercely collided. Although Xiao Chen was very confident in himself, he had to admit that Su Tianzi's strength was very strong. At least he wasn't a match for him now. As the 7th core disciple of the Tianyua sacred sect, Su Tianzi's strength was obviously above Yu Cheng and Lian Su. Therefore, with Xiao Chen's current strength, it was almost impossible for him to defeat Su Tianzi. However, relying on his tempered battle body, it was still possible for him to fight with Su Tianzi. In the head-on collision, Xiao Chen was at a disadvantage. However, after using the Tai sword finger twice in a row, Xiao Chen finally blocked Su Tianzi's annihilation palm. The spiritual energy giant palm was directly defeated by Xiao Chen. Seeing this, Su Tianzi's eyes involuntarily flashed with a touch of horror. It was impossible. How could Xiaochen block his attack? He looked at Xiaochen with doubt and coldness. Facing Su Tianzi's gaze, Xiaochen showed a faint smile on his face. Sorry, I'm actually also a pro-disciple. Xiaochen naturally knew why Su Tianzi was shocked. From the beginning to the end, this guy had regarded him as an ant. However, when he heard Xiaochen's words, Su Tianzi had to believe it because Xiaochen was actually able to block his annihilation palm. Although he was at a disadvantage, to be able to successfully block it was no longer something that a core disciple of the Tianfeng Zone could do. Looking coldly at Xiaochen, Su Tianzi said indifferently, "You shouldn't be among the top 10 pro-disciples of the Tianfeng Zone." As competitors, Su Tianzi naturally knew a lot about the top 10 pro-disciples of the Tianfeng Zone. However, there was no such person as Xiaochen among them. Hearing Su Tianzi's words, Xiaochen smiled slightly and said, "That's really unfortunate. Recently, I defeated He Chuxuan and became the 10th pro-disciple. It seems that senior brother Su's news is not very good." At this point, Xiaochen naturally did not need to hide his identity. Hearing this, Su Tianzi's eyes flashed with a touch of surprise. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 648. Su Tianzi naturally knew He Chuxuan. Not only He Chuxuan, but the information of each of the top 10 direct disciples of Tianfeng Zone could be said to be very clear to Su Tianzi. Of course, regarding the top 10 direct disciples of Tianyu's sacred sect, Tianfeng Zone naturally had a corresponding introduction. At this time, when he heard Xiaochen say that he defeated He Chuxuan today and was promoted to one of the top 10 direct disciples of Tianfeng Zone, Su Tianzi did not have much doubt about this. After all, with Xiaochen's strength, it was indeed possible for him to defeat He Chuxuan. It was only a moment of astonishment, but Su Tianzi quickly recovered. The smile on his face did not diminish as he said, "Oh, is that so? It seems that I really underestimated junior brother Xiao. But so what? Do you think that a mere He Chuxuan can compare with me?" The meaning of Su Tianzi's words was very simple. Even if Xiaochen defeated He Chuxuan, so what? Su Tianzi's strength, especially that idiot He Chuxuan, could not be compared to his. Xiaochen could defeat He Chuxuan, but it did not mean that he could defeat Su Tianzi. Hearing this, Xiaochen did not refute. After the fight just now, Xiaochen also admitted that his current strength was not Su Tianzi's opponent. However, was Xiaochen's purpose to defeat Su Tianzi here? Obviously not. Xiaochen had never thought of defeating Su Tianzi. There was only one purpose in coming here, and that was to get a share of the holy tomb. It could also be said that he wanted to snatch food from Su Tianzi's mouth. Therefore, Xiaochen did not need to defeat Su Tianzi at all. He only needed to make Su Tianzi give up the idea of fighting to the death with him. It was precisely because he did not want to fight to the death with Su Tianzi that Xiaochen was actually very relaxed. It was not difficult for Xiaochen to delay Su Tianzi and entangle him. Facing Xiaochen, who was still fearless, the killing intent in Su Tianzi's heart grew stronger. Then, without saying anything, he moved his feet and directly attacked Xiaochen. Facing Su Tianzi's attack, Xiaochen did not hesitate to move forward. The two immediately engaged in a fierce battle. The power of the battle between two direct disciples was naturally not something that ordinary disciples could contend with. Therefore, without the slightest hesitation, Nangong Yan, Guling Yao, and the others immediately distanced themselves from Xiaochen to avoid being affected by the aftermath of the battle between the two. As they fought fiercely, they retreated into the distance. However, at the same time, Nangong Yan's expression was very shocked. She had clearly heard the conversation between Xiaochen and Su Tianzi. She never would have thought that Xiaochen would actually be Tianfeng Zone's 10th direct disciple. He defeated He Chuxuan and became the 10th direct disciple? Nangong Yan thought to herself as she unconsciously looked at Xiaochen. Xiaochen's identity somewhat surprised Nangong Yan. One must know that the first core disciple and the 10th direct disciple seemed to be only one step apart, but the difference in status between the two was like the difference between clouds and mud. It was not an exaggeration to say that in the face of a direct disciple, even her father, the head of the family Nangong, had to treat them with respect. However, in the face of a core disciple, with the strength of the family Nangong, it was much more casual. The fierce battle continued. After knowing Xiao Chen's true identity, Su Tianzi did not have the slightest carelessness. He attacked with all his strength in order to defeat Xiao Chen in the shortest time possible. Unfortunately, relying on the strength of the tempered battle body, even though Xiao Chen fell into a disadvantageous position, there was no limit to his defeat. After attacking for a long time without success, Su Tianzi's face gradually darkened. He thought to himself viciously, "Damn it, how can this guy's body be so strong?" And, after hundreds of fierce exchanges, Su Tianzi had fully experienced the strength of Xiao Chen's body, which was comparable to that of a demon beast. At the same time, Su Tianzi gradually became aware of Xiao Chen's true purpose. From the beginning of the battle until now, Xiao Chen had no intention of competing with him at all. He was only blindly defending in order to not be defeated. Only defending and never counterattacking. In this way, relying on the tempered battle body, Su Tianzi really had no way to defeat Xiao Chen in a short time. Moreover, if the battle continued for a long time, Su Tianzi's consumption would be considerable. This guy doesn't want to compete with me. He just wants to share the opportunities in the holy mausoleum with me. Damn it. Su Tianzi quickly understood what was going on. As a result, the anger in his heart rose like a volcanic eruption. In Su Tianzi's view, what qualifications did Xiao Chen have to share the opportunities in the holy mausoleum with him? An ant actually dared to snatch food from the tiger's mouth. With this thought, Su Tianzi's attacks became fiercer and fiercer. At the same time, the pressure on Xiao Chen naturally increased. Su Tianzi, who was bitterly holding the upper hand, was already in a state of madness, as if killing Xiao Chen would not be enough to quell the hatred in his heart. However, although he had completely suppressed Xiao Chen and injured him, Su Tianzi was still a step away from delivering a fatal blow to Xiao Chen. The battle became more and more intense, but there was still no sign of it ending. Xiao Chen was not worried, but Su Tianzi was not. The prolonged battle was extremely unfavorable to Su Tianzi, because it meant that he would either have to waste time here with Xiao Chen, or he would have to make concessions and give Xiao Chen a share of the opportunities in the holy mausoleum. No one can touch my fortuitous encounter. No one. The anger in his heart grew deeper and deeper. How could Su Tianzi be willing to give up such a fat piece of meat to Xiao Chen? The fierce battle continued, but at this moment, the holy mausoleum suddenly changed. The black volcano in the distance began to erupt with hot magma. The magma poured down the mountain peak, and wherever it passed, the ground seemed to be roasted. Bursts of white smoke slowly rose. Smoke filled the air, and the temperature rapidly rose. Moreover, the magma continued to spread to the periphery of the holy mausoleum, showing signs of swallowing the entire place. The magma continued to spread to the periphery where Xiao Chen and the others were. Seeing this, the look in Su Tianzi's eyes became increasingly gloomy. At the same time, Xiao Chen opened his mouth to speak. "Senior brother Su, as the saying goes, those who see it have a share. The opportunities in the holy mausoleum are meant for those who are fated to obtain them. If you continue to entangle with me like this, I'm afraid we will all die here today." "Humph, with just you?" Su Tianzi coldly snorted when he heard Xiao Chen's words. In the face of Su Tianzi's cold snort, Xiao Chen smiled noncommittally and said, "In terms of combat power, I may not be as good as senior brother Su for the time being, but now that the magma is rolling over, if I go all out to delay senior brother Su, I'm afraid senior brother Su will find it difficult to escape. When the time comes, you and I will both perish in this rolling magma." Xiao Chen's words were not false. In terms of strength, he was indeed not Su Tianzi's opponent, but now that the holy mausoleum had undergone a great change, if Xiao Chen desperately tried to delay Su Tianzi, Xiao Chen would not even need to do anything, for the two of them would definitely be swallowed by the magma. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 649. Xiao Chen's words didn't sound like a threat at all, as though he was talking about a trivial matter. But the more this was the case, the angrier Su Tianzi became. Since when had Su Tianzi been led by the nose by an ant? He had absolute confidence that he could defeat Xiao Chen, but the current situation was obviously not suitable for him to continue fighting with Xiao Chen. Otherwise, not only would it be a waste of effort, both sides would suffer great losses, and he might even lose his life in the Holy Mausoleum. Everyone knew that the Holy Mausoleum was mysterious and dangerous. Therefore, under normal circumstances, no one would fight to the death in the Holy Mausoleum. Everyone had to preserve their strength to deal with the dangers in the Holy Mausoleum, unless it was a crucial moment to obtain the inheritance and opportunity. Only then would people fight to the death. Take Xiao Chen and Su Tianzi for example. Everyone had just entered the Holy Mausoleum, and the Holy Mausoleum had suddenly undergone a huge change, so it was obviously not suitable for them to continue fighting. However, Su Tianzi was extremely unwilling to let Xiao Chen go just like that. Xiao Chen looked at Su Tianzi with a faint smile and said indifferently, "Senior brother Su, you'd better make a decision quickly. You see, the magma is about to rush over. If you continue to hesitate, I can only perish together with senior brother Su today. My life doesn't mean much, but senior brother Su is known as the strongest genius in Tianfeng Zone. If you die here with me, it will be a little." Xiao Chen didn't continue, but his meaning was clear. There were only two paths before Su Tianzi. Either they continued to fight and perish together, or they gave up the opportunity in the Holy Mausoleum and both sides competed for it with their own abilities. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words again, Su Tianzi didn't answer, but cursed angrily in his heart. "Damned ant, good, very good, I'll spare your life for now. In any case, there are plenty of opportunities in the Holy Tomb. You're not qualified to compete with me for opportunities." Su Tianzi was furious, but his reason eventually prevailed over his anger. Thinking of this, he took the initiative to retreat and then shouted coldly, "Everyone stop and avoid the magma." Su Tianzi's words obviously meant that he had given up. After weighing the pros and cons, Su Tianzi finally gave up the idea of fighting to the death with Xiao Chen. Along with his words, the people from Tianyue sacred sect took the initiative to leave the battlefield and soared into the air to avoid the lava. At the same time, Nangong Yan, Guling Yao and the others quickly came to Xiao Chen's side. The two sides stood in the air and faced each other, but no one attacked. The magma below quickly spread to every corner of the Holy Mausoleum. Although the people standing proudly in the sky avoided the invasion of the magma, the terrifyingly high temperature still forced them to circulate the spiritual energy in their body to resist. Fortunately, the magma here is not formed by earth fire, otherwise I'm afraid we would all be finished. Compared to the others, Xiao Chen had a deeper understanding of the Holy Mausoleum. Previously, Xiao Chen was fortunate enough to go to Tianfeng Zone to cultivate. At that time, he had to rely on the heavenly flame sacred fire talisman given to him by Yifeng to resist the burning of the earth fire. Fortunately, the magma here was not formed by earth fire. Otherwise, even if they managed to avoid the magma, they certainly wouldn't be able to resist the terrifying heat of the earth fire. While resisting the extreme heat rising from the magma, they were also on guard against the other party's sudden attack. The two sides faced each other, but Su Tianzi's gaze was fixed on Xiao Chen. In this regard, Xiao Chen was naturally not to be outdone. With a light smile on his face, he met Su Tianzi's gaze. "Xiao Chen, don't be happy too early. Within the Holy Mausoleum, I, Su Tianzi, will have plenty of opportunities to kill you." Looking at Xiao Chen, Su Tianzi viciously thought. In this way, they faced each other for nearly an hour before the surrounding heat waves gradually dissipated. At the same time, the terrifying flames also slowly extinguished. However, as the magma gradually extinguished, the originally pitch-black ground seemed to be covered with a layer of rotten soil. It looked black and disgusting. The surrounding temperature quickly returned to normal. However, before the crowd could breathe a sigh of relief, a huge pressure suddenly descended from the sky. Under the pressure of this powerful pressure, the crowd couldn't fly at all. In an instant, they fell heavily to the ground. Forbidden Space Talisman Array. Feeling the pressure, Xiaochen and Su Tianzi spoke almost at the same time. This pressure was definitely caused by the Forbidden Space Talisman Array. It must be said that the Forbidden Space Talisman Array had reached the saint level. Although it didn't have any offensive power, as long as a cultivator was within the array's range, they would be prohibited from flying. This was because the terrifying pressure was impossible to resist at all. They didn't expect that there would be a Forbidden Space Talisman Array in the Holy Mausoleum. And from the looks of it, the Forbidden Space Talisman Array covered the entire Holy Mausoleum. Without the slightest ability to resist, the crowd fell from the sky one after another. Fortunately, the magma below them had already cooled down. Standing on the ground again, Xiaochen looked pensive. If there is a Forbidden Space Talisman Array, it means that if we want to obtain the opportunity in the Holy Mausoleum, I'm afraid we can only rely on foot to reach the central volcano. Xiaochen looked at the volcano at the end of the Holy Mausoleum. In fact, from the very beginning, Xiaochen had already guessed that the inheritance and opportunities in the Holy Mausoleum should be in that volcano. Now, it seemed that his guess was correct. Originally, without the Forbidden Space Talisman Array, the group would have been able to reach the Black Volcano in a short period of time. But now, with the Forbidden Space Talisman Array, the crowd's ability to fly had been deprived, so they could only rely on walking. This would take an unknown amount of time. In addition, Xiaochen was certain that there would be other tests waiting for them on the way to the volcano. Xiaochen secretly pondered. Su Tianzi obviously also thought of the same thing and turned his head to look coldly at Xiaochen. Su Tianzi coldly snorted. Xiaochen, if you have the guts, come to the volcano. That will be your burial ground. Su Tianzi had already thought it through. He didn't want to fight to the death with Xiaochen before he finally obtained the inheritance. In Su Tianzi's view, if Xiaochen didn't reach the Black Volcano, then the opportunity and inheritance in the Holy Mausoleum would naturally all belong to him, Su Tianzi. But if Xiaochen did reach there, Su Tianzi would definitely kill Xiaochen even if he had to pay a price. At that time, the inheritance and opportunity would still belong to him, Su Tianzi. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 650. Su Tianzi wanted to use all his strength to kill Xiaochen at the last moment. Moreover, he was not afraid that Xiaochen would not dare to come because that would be even better. Su Tianzi would still be able to monopolize the opportunities and inheritances in the sacred tomb. As soon as he finished speaking, without waiting for Xiaochen's reply, Su Tianzi immediately led everyone away, advancing towards the Black Volcano along the way. After watching Su Tianzi's group leave, Nangongyan frowned slightly and said, Su Tianzi's move is really insidious. In this way, no matter what, senior brother Xiaochen will have to fight Su Tianzi in the end, unless senior brother gives up on the opportunities and inheritances in the sacred tomb. Nangongyan directly exposed Su Tianzi's thoughts. It could be said that Xiaochen was now in a dilemma, but in this regard, Xiaochen smiled slightly and said, let's take things one step at a time. Let's take it one step at a time. Maybe the Black Volcano isn't the only place with opportunities. Perhaps there are also opportunities in other places. Moreover, we are here to get a share of the pie, so we don't have to care too much about the final result. Xiaochen's expression did not change too much. In Xiaochen's opinion, opportunities were things that one would be lucky to obtain and fate to lose. If they were really not fated to obtain it, then there was no need to be too conflicted. After hearing Xiaochen's words, Nangongyan did not say anything more. In her opinion, the opportunities in the sacred tomb were most likely not fated with Xiaochen. After the previous battle, anyone could see that Xiaochen was actually not Su Tianzi's opponent. If it really came down to snatching the opportunities in the end, Su Tianzi, who had no worries, could definitely kill Xiaochen. As he said, he had the ability to kill Xiaochen if he paid a price. Therefore, if Xiaochen insisted on going to the Black Volcano to confront Su Tianzi, the result might not be good. Xiaochen naturally knew what the Nangong Yan was thinking, and Xiao Chen's idea was very simple. First, they would walk around the holy tomb and see if there were any gains. If the opportunity and inheritance were really at the Black Volcano, then they could just give up. Now was not the time to talk about how the path of cultivation was like sailing against the current, or how one had to fight for opportunities. He knew that he was no match for Su Tianzi, but he still forced himself to fight. That would be stupid. How could Xiaochen do such a stupid thing? He knew that there was a tiger in the mountain, but he still went to the mountain. In Xiaochen's opinion, this was not bravery, but a problem with his IQ. Without saying anything more, Xiaochen glanced at everyone and said with a smile, "Let's go. It's rare for us to come to this legendary holy tomb, so we should at least take a look around." Xiaochen's expression was very relaxed. As soon as his voice fell, everyone chose a different direction and walked towards the Black Volcano at the same time. Along the way, as Xiaochen had guessed, the anti-flight charm matrix completely covered every corner of the holy mausoleum. Therefore, it was impossible for Xiaochen and the others to fly in the air in the holy mausoleum. Along the way, the holy tomb gave off a lifeless feeling, and there was not the slightest bit of life. But apart from feeling a little cold, there was nothing else. After walking for more than an hour, no one had encountered any danger. Rumor has it that the holy tomb has a test set by the holy tomb. Why is this holy tomb so quiet? Nangong Yan asked suspiciously along the way. The sacred mausoleum was the mausoleum of a saint and was the place where a saint left his inheritance. Therefore, when choosing a successor, he would naturally have to go through a selection process. However, the sacred mausoleum was strange. Apart from the huge change from before and the space restriction glyph array, there were no other changes. Nangong Yan could not understand this. As soon as Nangong Yan finished his sentence, the ground beneath everyone's feet suddenly shook. At the same time, Xiaochen, who walked in front of everyone, chuckled softly without turning back. "Miss Nangong, your mouth is really, you want to say that I have a crow's mouth, right?" Xiaochen didn't say it out directly, but Nangong Yan didn't shy away from it. Indeed, as soon as Nangong Yan finished speaking, something strange happened. In front of everyone, from the ground, white bones slowly drilled out. These white bones didn't have flesh and blood, only skeletons. However, they were all equipped with Earth's spiritual weapons and Heaven's spiritual weapons. Hundreds of white bones quickly crawled out from the ground and firmly blocked Xiaochen's path. Seeing this group of white bones, everyone didn't think much of it at first, but soon, Nangong Yan seemed to have thought of something. His expression changed abruptly and he exclaimed, "These are bone soldiers?" Nangong Yan seemed to be unsure of her own judgment, so she did not have much confidence in her words. However, hearing this, Xiaochen asked curiously, "Miss Nangong, do you know what these bones are?" Xiaochen had secretly observed these white bones and was sure that they had no breath of life. But now, they could move freely, which made Xiaochen feel a little strange. What was certain was that these white bones were all human, but the fact that dead humans could move freely as bones was somewhat puzzling. Looking at the Nangong Yan in doubt, Xiaochen looked at Nangong Yan and said with uncertainty, "I once saw an introduction to bone soldiers in an ancient book. It is said that this bone soldier is similar to the method of refining puppets, but it is much more inferior than the method of refining puppets. However, the cruel method is despised by many powerhouses in the Sky River continent. So, a long time ago, under the joint decision of many saints, the method of refining bone soldiers was listed as evil, and no one was allowed to practice it. According to the records, in order to refine this bone soldier, it must be refined by a living person. The flesh and blood of the person must be refined, and then the soul must be scattered and imprisoned in the skeleton. In this way, although the bone soldiers are dead, they can maintain the ability to move. At the same time, they can be 100% loyal. Nangong Yan's understanding of bone soldiers was also from books. In general, the two methods of bone soldiers should be regarded as a branch of the puppet technique, but compared to the puppet technique, they were much weaker. Hearing Nangong Yan's account, a chill flashed in Xiao Chen's eyes. To actually refine a person's flesh and blood, such a cruel method, it was no wonder that the saints of the Tianhe continent would list the refining method of this bone weapon as a forbidden technique, and forbid anyone from practicing it. Doesn't the thousands of bone soldiers in front of him mean that thousands of living people were forcibly refined? Looking at the bone soldiers in front of him, Xiaochen said slowly, "If these bone soldiers were given to us by the master of the sacred mausoleum as a trial, then it seems that the master of the sacred mausoleum is not a good person. Perhaps he was a great devil when he was alive? Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation." This chapter ends. Chapter 651. Xiaochen hated this cruel method of refining bone soldiers. Xiaochen admitted that he was not a good person, but Xiaochen would never learn such evil techniques. According to Nangong Yan's introduction, once this bone soldier was successfully refined, not only could it retain its strength, but it would also not feel pain, and there was no need to worry that it would betray you. It would only obey the orders of its master. It could definitely be regarded as a very powerful method. The most important thing was that this method of refining bone soldiers was not difficult to cultivate, and it did not have any requirements for talent. Therefore, this method of refining bone soldiers was still popular in the Tianhe continent for a while. It was true that the method of refining bone soldiers was powerful, but so what? Xiaochen was not interested in cultivating such an unorthodox method. Looking calmly at the thousands of bone soldiers in front of him, Xiaochen found that the strength of these more than 1,000 bone soldiers was generally at the level of the Dao confirmation realm and the Dao seeking realm. Like this time, they were naturally not afraid. Sighing softly, Xiaochen said indifferently, "You were refined into bone weapons when you were alive, and you have been living like walking corpses until now. I'm sure you don't want to be like this. Since we have met, I will free all of you today and no longer be imprisoned by others." Regardless of whether these bone soldiers still had consciousness or whether they could understand his words, in Xiaochen's view, these bone soldiers were equivalent to being forcibly imprisoned. Even if they died, they could not ascend to heaven and could only be used as tools endlessly. They had suffered great pain when they were alive, and they still could not rest in peace after death. In this regard, Xiaochen did have some sympathy for these bone soldiers. As soon as his voice fell, the storage ring in Xiaochen's hand flashed, and the ink dragon sword immediately appeared in his hand. Holding the ink dragon sword, Xiaochen did not hesitate at all. He took a step forward and rushed directly towards the thousands of bone soldiers in front of him. These bone soldiers were obviously a test left by the master of the holy mausoleum. He chose to fight with these bone soldiers, but there was no fighting spirit in Xiaochen's eyes. In Xiaochen's view, he did not want to fight with these bone soldiers, but to help them escape and give them relief. He took the lead and rushed into the encirclement of the bone soldiers. Following Xiaochen's action, these bone soldiers also reacted and surrounded Xiaochen. Just as Xiaochen chose to attack, Nangong Yan and the others naturally would not stand by and watch. They followed closely behind Xiaochen and also attacked these bone soldiers. The ink dragon sword in his hand constantly swung. Just as Nangong Yan said, these bone soldiers did not know pain at all. If you did not give them a fatal blow, they would not fall at all. If you cut off their arms or legs, these bone warriors wouldn't even stop. They would continue to attack you. Only by cutting off their heads with a sword could you truly kill them. They are indeed war machines. They can retain their previous combat strength, and at the same time, are not afraid of death, and have no pain or fear. Moreover, the threshold of cultivation is so low. No wonder the method of refining bone soldiers was so popular at that time. Xiaochen whispered softly as he fought. These bone soldiers were born for war. Think about it. If a country like the Moonless Empire had a bone soldier legion, it did not need many, only 100,000 people would be enough. Perhaps Danyang County would have been unified long ago. Feeling pity for these bone soldiers, Xiaochen did not hesitate at all. Because in Xiaochen's view, killing them was really helping them and freeing them. Under the leadership of Xiaochen, everyone fought fiercely with these more than 1,000 bone soldiers. After more than 2 hours, everyone killed all of these bone soldiers. All of their heads were cut off, and the ground was covered with bones. Then Xiaochen asked 2 disciples of Tianfeng Xingzong to dig a deep pit on the ground and bury all these bones. Although he did not know the identity of these bone soldiers when they were alive, and did not know how long they had been here, Xiaochen's action could be considered as letting them rest in peace. Perhaps he could not give them anything else, but at least Xiaochen could let them have a quiet place after death, and not be used as a tool of war. He led everyone to bow to the place where these bone soldiers were buried, and it was also at this time that a faint light appeared at the place where the bone soldiers had appeared. Then, a piece of jade slowly floated up from the ground. Seeing the appearance of this jade, everyone's face was filled with joy, but only Xiaochen's eyes flashed with a chill. More than 1,000 bone soldiers had been killed by the group, which was considered to be passing the first test of the Master of the Holy Mausoleum. Thus, the technique relaying jade might be one of the opportunities in the Holy Mausoleum. However, combined with the previous situation, Xiaochen had vaguely guessed what the technique in the technique relaying jade was. It was the method of refining bone soldiers. As soon as they arrived, they obtained the opportunity in the sacred tomb, but everyone did not act rashly. Instead, they all looked at Xiaochen. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Xiaochen slowly walked up to the technique relaying jade and reached out to grab it. Just when everyone thought that Xiaochen was ready to accept the opportunity, to their surprise, Xiaochen did not hesitate at all. He clenched his fist and immediately destroyed the technique relaying jade. It was completely crushed into powder. Seeing Xiaochen destroy the jade, everyone, including Nangongyan, was stunned. Nangongyan asked with a puzzled expression. "Senior brother Xiaochen, what are you doing? This jade must contain the opportunity of this sacred tomb, why did you destroy it? Why would I, Xiaochen, practice such a cruel cultivation method? You don't need to practice it either. Although the path of martial arts is full of thorns, no matter what the situation is, I always feel that since we are born as humans, we must have our own bottom line." In the face of Nangongyan's questioning, Xiaochen said indifferently, without the slightest regret for destroying this jade. After hearing Xiaochen's words, how could Nangongyan not guess that what was recorded in the jade just now was the method of refining bone soldiers? And Xiaochen obviously also guessed this point, so without the slightest hesitation, he directly destroyed the jade. In Xiaochen's heart, on the path of martial arts, there was nothing wrong with fighting against the heavens, but one must never do something heartless. In order to improve one's strength, one must practice a vicious cultivation method like the method of refining bone soldiers. This was something that Xiaochen despised. Every expert's path of growth was accompanied by mountains of corpses and seas of blood, and Xiaochen was no exception. Along the way, Xiaochen had killed many people, but Xiaochen would never indiscriminately kill the innocent. This was the bottom line, and also the pride in Xiaochen's heart. He looked down on a vicious cultivation method like the method of refining bone soldiers, so no matter how strong it was, Xiaochen would not practice it. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 652. He destroyed the jade stone without hesitation. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Nangongyan's beautiful eyes flashed with a touch of surprise. Obviously, she did not expect that someone would choose to give up the jade stone that was suspected to be the method of refining bone soldiers without hesitation. Moreover, from Xiaochen's expression and words, Nangongyan could be sure that Xiaochen really did not want to cut it, or rather, he looked down on the method of refining bone soldiers. The strength of the method of refining bone soldiers was naturally undeniable, but Xiaochen did not take any action. After being stunned for a moment, Nangongyan smiled slightly and whispered softly, "What a strange person. Brother Xiaochen is like this. He seems to be approachable, but he is prouder than anyone else in his heart. If he doesn't like something, even if it is the best treasure in the world, he will not take a second look at it." Although Nangongyan's voice was small, Gu Lingyao on the side heard it and smiled slightly. Gu Lingyao's understanding of Xiao Chen was obviously not comparable to Nan Gongyan, so in the face of Xiao Chen's behavior, Gu Lingyao was not surprised at all. Hearing Gu Lingyao's words, Nan Gongyan did not say anything more, but she had a different view of Xiao Chen in her heart. At least Nan Gongyan had never seen such a proud person. Pride was not necessarily arrogance. For example, Xiao Chen. Usually, Xiao Chen gave people the feeling that he was approachable, but people who were familiar with Xiao Chen knew that the pride in Xiao Chen's heart was absolutely not inferior to anyone, even more. Without noticing Nan Gongyan's change in destroying the jade stone, Xiao Chen did not explain anything to the crowd. Although he guessed that everyone present must have the idea of refining bone soldiers, Xiao Chen did not allow it. "Let's go." After saying lightly to everyone, Xiao Chen took the lead and walked towards the black volcano. After the battle just now, to be honest, Xiao Chen did not have a good impression of the owner of the holy mausoleum. A person who could practice the method of refining bone soldiers, even if he was a saint, was not worthy of his respect, not to mention that this person had probably refined a lot of bone soldiers before he died. Xiao Chen led everyone on the road. Along the way, they encountered bone soldiers 5 times in a row. Of course, in the end, they were all defeated by the crowd. With every bone soldier's obstruction, there would be a reward after the battle. In addition to the jade stone for the first time, the following rewards were almost all spirit weapons, elixirs, heaven and earth treasures, and so on. Xiao Chen naturally did not destroy these things, but he also did not want them. Perhaps in order to appease the crowd, Xiao Chen gave these things to Nan Gongyan and the others. They were not very good things. The best of the 5 rewards was a heaven-level spirit weapon, but it was only a heaven-level mid-grade spear. Xiao Chen had no use for it, and the ink dragon sword was much better than this spear, so Xiao Chen did not hesitate to give it to a disciple of Tian Fengxingzong. There was no sunrise or sunset in the holy mausoleum, so after an unknown amount of time, the group finally arrived at the foot of the black volcano. Looking at the black volcano up close, everyone realized that the volcano was simply boundless, and the mountain was covered with black rocks, looking eerie and terrifying. When they arrived at the foot of the black volcano, Xiao Chen and the others were naturally ready to climb the mountain, but before they could move, the ground shook again, but this time there were no bone soldiers. Instead, a huge arena rose from the ground, and everyone stood directly on the arena. The arena was huge, and it could easily accommodate hundreds of people. Therefore, Xiao Chen and the others did not feel crowded even though there were only a dozen of them standing on it. The sudden appearance of the arena stunned Xiao Chen and the others, but they quickly reacted. This was probably one of the tests, but they did not know what the test was about. They stood calmly on the arena, and soon, a middle-aged man in a black robe with a pale and vicious face appeared in the air above the arena. However, the man's figure was very ethereal, and it was formed by a wisp of soul. With the appearance of the middle-aged man, Nan Gongyan whispered to Xiao Chen, "This is a wisp of Saint Soul. It seems that this middle-aged man is the owner of the holy mausoleum." Hearing Nan Gongyan's words, Xiao Chen also looked at the middle-aged man in the sky, but he did not feel the slightest anger. However, facing the gazes of Xiao Chen and the others, the middle-aged man said expressionlessly, "My name is Baigu Saint. Since you have entered my holy mausoleum, you all have the hope of obtaining my inheritance. However, my inheritance can only be passed to one person. This is the last test, and only one person can pass it. Once you pass this test, you will be able to find my inheritance," the middle-aged man said slowly. Hearing this, Nan Gongyan's face became extremely ugly. To be precise, after learning the middle-aged man's name, Nan Gongyan's face became extremely ugly. Noticing the change in Nan Gongyan's expression, Xiao Chen asked, "Why, do you know this Baigu Saint?" "I've read about him in ancient books," Nan Gongyan said with an ugly face in the face of Xiao Chen's inquiry. According to Nan Gongyan, the Baigu Saint was a figure from thousands of years ago. No one knew the origin of the Baigu Saint. They only knew that when he appeared, he set off a reign of terror in the Tianhe continent with the method of refining bone weapons. According to the records, the Baigu Saint's methods were ruthless. massacring cities and destroying countries was as simple as eating and drinking for him. Under the Baigu saint's ruthless methods, the Tiana continent at that time could be said to be a bloodbath. Except for those holy sects with saints, many other countries and sects, large and small, were slaughtered by the Baigu saint. In the end, several saints of the Tiana continent finally couldn't bear the tyranny of the Baigu saint and wanted to join forces to kill him. Unfortunately, the Baigu saint was quite cunning and escaped in the end. But strangely, after the Baigu saint escaped, he never appeared again. In the end, the world slowly forgot about this matter. Nan Gongyan then told Xiaochen everything she had read about the White Bone Saint in the ancient books. She then added in a puzzled tone. However, the White Bone Saint shouldn't have died in the battle back then. Didn't another saint make a move and kill him? This was the holy tomb of the Baigu saint. In this way, the Baigu saint was obviously dead. According to Nan Gongyan, the Baigu saint finally escaped in the battle thousands of years ago. In this way, could it be that another saint killed the Baigu saint after that? Begging for a monthly vote, begging for a recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 653. This place was actually the holy tomb of the White Bone Saint. This was indeed unexpected for no other reason than the fact that the White Bone Saint was simply too notorious. Nan Gongyan was puzzled, but Xiaochen had completely lost interest in this holy tomb. He looked calmly at the White Bone Saint in the sky. At the same time, the White Bone Saint continued to speak. The requirements for this last test are very simple. Only one of you can survive, and the one who survives will be able to obtain my inheritance. All right, you may begin. As the White Bone Saint's voice fell, the expressions of Nan Gongyan and the others changed drastically. At the same time, everyone involuntarily looked at Xiaochen. No one had expected that the White Bone Saint would actually leave behind such a test. It was simply to make everyone kill each other. Only 1 out of 10 people could pass. In this way, if they were greedy, then they would definitely kill each other. After all, the victor would obtain the inheritance of a saint, so how many people in the world would be able to resist such temptation? The more than 10 disciples of Tian Fengshenzong were somewhat tempted, but at the same time, they were also somewhat afraid. On the one hand, they really wanted the inheritance of the White Bone Saint. Even though the White Bone Saint was a saint who was spurned by others, his strength was unquestionable. The fact that he was able to escape from the encirclement of several saints was enough to explain everything. Imagine, if they could obtain the inheritance of the White Bone Saint, then wouldn't they, as ordinary disciples, be able to successfully become core disciples in a short period of time? Moreover, they might even be able to become personal disciples in the end. Greed gradually grew in their hearts, but they didn't lose their minds. Reason told them that now was not the time to think about this, because there was still Xiaochen. With Xiaochen's strength, it wouldn't be difficult for him to kill all of them present. Even if Guling Yao and Nan Gongyan joined forces, they probably wouldn't be able to stop Xiaochen. At the same time as greed arose, fear arose in their hearts. Noticing the changes in the more than 10 disciples of Tian Fengshenzong, Xiaochen could naturally guess what they were thinking. However, at this time, Xiaochen had no interest in the inheritance of the White Bone Saint. Xiaochen didn't care about such an inheritance. Turning his head to look at the crowd, Xiaochen said calmly, "We don't want this inheritance anymore. What's the use of having the inheritance of such an inhumane person? Let's go." Seeing that many people were greedy, Xiaochen was ready to lead the crowd away and directly give up the opportunity in the holy mausoleum. Hearing this, the expressions of several disciples of Tian Fengshenzong changed slightly, and a trace of unwillingness flashed in their eyes. Some of them even directly spoke to Xiaochen. "Senior Xiaochen, if we leave, then won't the opportunity here be given to Su Tianzi for nothing?" Although he didn't say it explicitly, the meaning of this disciple was already very clear. He didn't want to give up the inheritance of the White Bone Saint. Hearing this, Xiaochen's eyes flashed with a trace of coldness. He looked directly at this disciple and said, "What, do you want to kill us and then take the inheritance of the White Bone Saint?" For the sake of an inheritance, you can disregard the friendship between your fellow disciples and do something like killing your fellow disciples? Senior Xiaochen, I didn't mean that, but this is the inheritance of the White Bone Saint after all. If we can obtain it. Facing Xiaochen's questioning, this disciple was clearly a little flustered and stammered, but in the end, he still expressed his reluctance to give up the inheritance of the White Bone Saint. Hearing this disciple's words, Xiaochen turned his head to look at the others. Obviously, the inheritance of the White Bone Saint was simply too tempting for them to describe. Just as everyone's opinions were divided, the White Bone Saint in the sky sneered and said in a hoarse voice, "Friendship between fellow disciples? Ha, this is the funniest joke I've ever heard. Little kid, I see that you have good talent, but who would have thought that you are so pedantic? In this world, friendship is the most worthless thing. Only one's own strength is king. Let me show you the way. This little kid doesn't know what's good for him, and his strength is the strongest among you. Why don't you join forces to take him down, and then determine the final winner?" Xiaochen clearly expressed his unwillingness to weaken the White Bone Saint, and the White Bone Saint also spoke at this time to tempt everyone. As the White Bone Saint's voice fell, the eyes of the greedy Tianfeng Xingzong disciples gradually changed at this time. Obviously, the words of the White Bone Saint had completely ignited the greed in their hearts. Who didn't want to become a powerhouse in the limelight? Who didn't want to be the ruler of the world and leave a legacy for generations? In the face of the inheritance left by a saint, these disciples obviously couldn't control the greed in their hearts. Their eyes were locked on Xiaochen. Seeing this, a touch of disappointment flashed in Xiaochen's eyes, and he said, "In life, there are things to do and things not to do. I can understand that you want to become stronger, but if you use this method to obtain strength, I can't communicate with you, and I can't sit back and do nothing." Xiaochen saw through the thoughts of these disciples and tried to persuade them for the last time. However, it was obvious that Xiaochen's words didn't change their minds. A touch of killing intent gradually appeared in their eyes. In the face of the saint's inheritance, these disciples of Tianfeng Xingzong had completely gone crazy. No one knew who shouted, but then 5 disciples of Tianfeng Xingzong immediately rushed towards Xiaochen. Everyone, attacked together. Let's kill Xiaochen first, then we'll decide who the saint's inheritance belongs to. Following this angry roar, the 5 disciples of Tianfeng Xingzong immediately rushed towards Xiaochen. In response, Xiaochen only sighed softly and said, "The greed in your hearts has not only made you lose your conscience, but also your ability to judge." Xiaochen didn't care about the 5 ordinary disciples of Tianfeng Xingzong at all. Just as Xiaochen said, driven by greed, these 5 people had lost even the most basic ability to judge. If they dared to attack him with just the 5 of them, what else could it be other than losing their minds? Sighing softly, Xiaochen's storage ring flashed, and the ink dragon sword instantly appeared in his hand. With a slash of the sword, he directly used the square heaven sword shadow. Since these 5 people attacked him because of greed, Xiaochen naturally wouldn't show mercy. With a slash of the sword, sword shadows filled the sky. Faced with the hardness of the sky, these 5 people had no way of dodging at all. In just an instant, the 5 of them were beheaded, and their bodies were directly torn to pieces by the countless sword edges. Please add, please vote, please recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 654. Xiaochen didn't show any mercy. He didn't even give the 5 disciples a chance to beg for mercy. He killed them all with a single sword strike. Seeing that Xiaochen killed the 5 disciples directly, the remaining Tianfeng Xingzong disciples' faces changed drastically. They were afraid that Xiaochen would attack them. However, Xiaochen spoke first. "I've already said that there are things a man should do and things he shouldn't do. If you use this method to obtain power, I, Xiaochen, would rather not. You should also put away the greed in your hearts." Xiaochen did not make a move against those disciples. Although they wanted the lineage of the White Bone Saint very much, they held themselves back. As such, Xiaochen only gave them a warning before sheathing his sword. Seeing that Xiaochen chose to kill so decisively, Nangong Yan's beautiful eyes were even more surprised. Just when Xiaochen killed the 5 disciples of the Tianfeng Saint, on the other side of the Black Volcano, where Su Tianzi and more than a dozen disciples of the Tianyue sacred sect were. At this time, they also encountered the same situation as Xiaochen and others. A wisp of the divine soul of the White Bone Saint was also floating in the air. However, in the face of the same situation, Su Tianzi's choice was different from Xiaochen's. Among the disciples of the Tianyue sacred sect, only the 2 core disciples were still alive at this time. As for the others, they had already become corpses. The 2 core disciples continuously retreated, while Su Tianzi's expression was calm as he closed in on them step by step. As they retreated, the 2 of them opened their mouths to beg for mercy. "Senior brother Su, we never thought of snatching the inheritance from you. Please let us go, let us go." Just now, after the White Bone Saint stated the conditions of this test, Su Tianzi almost killed the disciples of the Tianyue sacred sect without hesitation. Caught off guard, he killed more than a dozen disciples of the Tianyue sacred sect who followed him all the way. Only the 2 core disciples who were slightly stronger escaped. However, this was obviously only temporary. Su Tianzi was constantly approaching them. In the face of the 2 begging for mercy, Su Tianzi said calmly, "Let you go? Do you think I will believe your words? If I didn't make the first move, I'm afraid I would have been besieged by you. In the face of the saint's inheritance, you didn't think of killing me?" Su Tianzi's words were so confident, as if it was a matter of course. He was the one who killed for the saint's inheritance, but from his mouth, it seemed like he was the victim. Regardless of whether Su Tianzi's words were true or false, even if he really thought so, it could only be said that Su Tianzi was using himself to measure others. As the saying goes, the world is the same as the way you look at it. For example, if you were a fickle villain, then in your eyes, everyone else in this world was also fickle villains. Su Tianzi was such a person. In the face of the saint's inheritance, the friendship of fellow disciples was nothing in his eyes. In this way, in his eyes, others would obviously attack him for the saint's inheritance. As soon as his voice fell, Su Tianzi did not give the 2 any more chances. He leaped forward and quickly killed the 2. The more than a dozen disciples of the Tianyue sacred sect who followed Su Tianzi into the sacred mausoleum probably did not expect that they would die in the hands of Su Tianzi. Just when Su Tianzi had successfully killed the other disciples of the Tianyue sacred sect, Xiaochen, after killing the 5 disciples, turned to look at the White Bone Saint in the sky and said indifferently, "I, Xiaochen, am not worthy of your inheritance. You'd better find someone else." As soon as he finished speaking, Xiaochen turned around and prepared to leave with everyone. However, the White Bone Saint was one step ahead and laughed coldly. "Ah, what a good not worthy. However, do you think that my inheritance is something that you can take as you wish? Since you're willing to do as I say, then all of you can die here." Xiaochen's words had obviously angered the White Bone Saint. As soon as he finished speaking, a dense black qi spread out from his body. From the black qi, a bloody and cold aura was constantly emitted. Although it was only a wisp of a saint's soul, the strength of the White Bone Saint's soul could not be underestimated. Xiaochen's disregard for his inheritance had aroused the killing intent in the White Bone Saint's heart. Feeling the intense killing intent from the White Bone Saint, Xiaochen also turned around and stood with his sword in hand. After being intertwined, this wisp of the White Bone Saint's soul should only be equivalent to a cultivator of the Wei transformation realm in battle. Compared to a saint, it was thousands of miles away, but it still gave Xiaochen a lot of pressure. "I will give you another chance. Do as I say. Not only can you obtain my inheritance, but you can also live. How about it?" Looking at Xiaochen, who was standing with his sword in hand, a hint of admiration flashed in the White Bone Saint's eyes. Xiaochen looked down on him, but on the other side, Su Tianzi was very cooperative. However, between Xiaochen and Su Tianzi, the White Bone Saint obviously favored Xiaochen. He felt that Xiaochen was the most suitable person for his inheritance. On the other side, even though Su Tianzi had already killed the people of Tianyue sacred sect, the White Bone Saint still did not give him his inheritance. His purpose was to wait for Xiaochen. However, facing the White Bone Saint's final threat, Xiaochen said almost without hesitation. I said, I am not worthy of your inheritance. He chose to refuse without hesitation. At the same time, while saying this, Xiaochen was secretly thinking of a way to deal with it. At this time, facing a wisp of a saint's soul, it was still difficult to resist. Even so, Xiaochen could not compromise, because there was no way to compromise. Could it be that he had to kill Gu Lingyao with his own hands? That was absolutely impossible. Seeing that Xiaochen refused without hesitation again, the killing intent in the White Bone Saint's eyes became extremely intense. Then, he said coldly, in that case, you will die. After saying that, the black qi on the White Bone Saint's body suddenly surged. At the same time, he slapped at Xiaochen. Before the attack arrived, Xiaochen already felt a great pressure. Even though it was only a wisp of a saint's soul, Xiaochen was still unable to deal with it. Seeing that the White Bone Saint did not hesitate to kill Xiaochen, Nangong Yan and Gu Lingyao also did not hesitate to come to Xiaochen's side. They were ready to help Xiaochen resist the attack of the White Bone Saint. Humph, an ant wants to compete with the bright moon. You are courting death. Today, I will fulfill your wish. Seeing Gu Lingyao and Nangong Yan's actions, the White Bone Saint shouted coldly. Just as the White Bone Saint's voice fell, something strange happened again. From the other side of the holy tomb, a golden light soared into the sky. At the same time, an indifferent voice came from the sky. Why can't an ant compete with the bright moon? As long as you don't admit defeat, an ant will become the bright moon one day. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 655. The golden light soared into the sky without any warning. Accompanied by this indifferent but seemingly magical voice, the White Bone Saint's hand movements paused. Immediately after, he looked at the golden light in the distance with an incomparably ferocious expression and gritted his teeth as he shouted angrily. Xiaosheng, are you really going to be so resolute that you won't even let me leave my inheritance behind? Xiaosheng. Upon hearing the Bone Saint's words, Xiaochen's expression changed slightly and a strange glint flashed in his eyes. Then, in the blink of an eye, a handsome young man in a white robe appeared in front of the Bone Saint out of thin air. The young man's figure was slender, but he stood upright. His black hair fluttered in the wind. He placed his hands behind his back and said with a straight face, I've already said that your inheritance shouldn't appear in this world. Back then, I gave you time to build the holy mausoleum so that you would have a place to settle down after your death. As a saint, I don't want to see your corpse exposed in the wilderness after your death. However, this doesn't mean that you can leave your inheritance behind. Looking at the young man standing opposite the Bone Saint in the sky, Xiaochen was stunned. He couldn't be more familiar with this figure. It's really Xiaosheng. It's really him, that's right. This young man in white was Xiaochen's ancestor, Xiaosheng. However, he was just a wisp of holy soul like the Bone Saint. Judging from his aura, Xiaochen should only be in the saint realm when he left behind this wisp of holy soul. He had yet to break through to the quasi-saint realm. This was normal. Xiaosheng came to the Tianhe mainland by chance and broke through to the saint realm there. However, Xiaosheng only broke through to the quasi-saint realm after returning to the Tianqian mainland. Therefore, when he was in the Tianhe mainland, Xiaosheng was only in the saint realm at that time. Xiaochen didn't expect to see Xiaosheng here. If he asked himself honestly, there was only one person that Xiaochen worshipped, and that was Xiaosheng. Xiaosheng was Xiaochen's ancestor, and at the same time, Xiaochen admired what he had done. In Xiaochen's words, that was how a man should be. That was Xiaochen's evaluation of Xiaosheng. Sensing Xiaochen's abnormality, Gu Lingyao asked with concern, Brother Xiaochen, are you all right? However, Xiaochen ignored Gu Lingyao's question. His eyes were fixed on Xiaosheng. At this time, Xiaosheng was less calm and indifferent than when he was in the Tianqian mainland, but more domineering. He was like a sword. At the end of his life, Shaoxing's cultivation had reached the quasi-saint realm, but his sharpness was more restrained. Shaoxing in the Tiana mainland, although his cultivation was only in the saint realm, he was more like an unsheathed sharp Jianyi, showing off his sharpness. It was no exaggeration to say that Shaoxing was the person that the White Bone Saint didn't want to meet the most. Back then, he had escaped the encirclement of several saints, but in the end, he had died at the hands of Shaoxing. With his own strength, Shaoxing had killed the White Bone Saint. No matter how the White Bone Saint used all kinds of methods, they were all useless against Shaoxing. It was as if he was a natural nemesis. In front of Shaoxing, the White Bone Saint was so powerless. Gritting his teeth, the White Bone Saint enunciated each word clearly. Shaoxing, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have died in such a desolate place. You gave me time to build the holy mausoleum, but you had already made your own arrangements. After I died, you deliberately left behind this wisp of saint soul. It was all for today, wasn't it? Back then, the White Bone Saint had escaped the encirclement of several saints, but before he could celebrate, Shaoxing had blocked his way. Naturally, the two of them had a great battle. However, the result was something that the White Bone Saint hadn't expected. They were both saints, but in front of Shaoxing, the White Bone Saint couldn't resist at all. After a great battle, the White Bone Saint fled, but Shaoxing chased after him. The two of them chased and fled all the way to the Fenghua Mountains. In the end, the White Bone Saint was severely injured by Shaoxing in the Fenghua Mountains. When he was dying, Shaoxing gave the White Bone Saint time to build the holy mausoleum. According to Shaoxing, even though the White Bone Saint had done many evil things, he was still a saint. After his death, Shaoxing didn't want his corpse to be exposed in the wilderness. There was no way for him to live. His injuries were too serious, and his vitality was constantly fading. At the last moment of his life, the White Bone Saint had indeed built the holy mausoleum. However, he also took the opportunity to leave his inheritance behind. He thought that everything would be fine, but Shaoxing was obviously prepared. He also left a wisp of his divine soul in the holy mausoleum. Ignoring the White Bone Saint's roar, Shaoxing said indifferently, "Say no more. Your inheritance is too evil. It can't be left behind. Do it." Knowing that the White Bone Saint wouldn't give up without a fight, Shaoxing said directly. Hearing this, the White Bone Saint was filled with hatred. He shouted angrily, "Shaoxing, you've gone too far." Saying that, the White Bone Saint charged at Shaoxing. The two saints' divine souls immediately clashed. The battle in the sky broke out. On the stage, Shaoxing's eyes were still fixed on Shaoxing. At the same time, Nangongyan, who had been silently muttering something, suddenly remembered something. Nangongyan looked at Shaoxing in the sky and said excitedly, "Shaoxing, Shaoxing, I remember now. I remember now." Nangongyan couldn't help but scream. Looking at the excited Nangongyan, Shaoxing came back to his senses and turned to look at the excited Nangongyan. Seeing this, Nangongyan took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. He said to Shaoxing with a longing look, "I remember who the Shaoxing is. He's the Tai Saint." The Tai Saint was Shaoxing's title on the Tiana continent. These 4 words were absolutely famous on the Tiana continent. Even now, he was known as the #1 victor on the Tiana continent. The Tai Saint, Shaoxing, is not only known as the #1 saint on the Tiana continent, but also the strongest person below the quasi-saints. In the absence of quasi-saints on the Tiana continent, the Tai Saint, Shaoxing, is a person who looks down on all heroes. He and the White Bone Saint have mysterious origins. It's as if they appeared out of thin air. However, compared to the White Bone Saint, the Tai Saint, Shaoxing, is a legend. He single-handedly defeated all the sage sects on the Tiana continent, and defeated all the saints on the Tiana continent. Back then, the Tai Saint could be said to be the nightmare of all the saints on the Tiana continent. At the same time, he was the dream lover of all the women on the Tiana continent. It is said that in the Tai Saint's era, all the geniuses of his generation were suppressed by him, and all the peerless beauties of the sage sects fell in love with him. Finally remembering who Xiaochen was, Nan Gongyan said with a longing look, as if he hated that he wasn't born in the same era as Xiaosheng. He didn't have the chance to personally witness the magnificent scene of Xiaosheng dominating the world. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 656. Nan Gongyan said with a look of longing. It could be said that Xiaosheng was like a dazzling comet that streaked across the Tiana continent, leaving behind a thick and colorful stroke in the history of the Tiana continent. Every era had a leading figure of that era, whether it was a single person or a group of people. In Xiaosheng's era, the holy sons, saints, saintesses, all seemed so dim in front of Xiaosheng. That was the era that belonged to Xiaosheng, and no one could compete with him. Some people even said that if the Tiana continent still had the power of the origin, Xiaosheng would have definitely become a quasi-sage, surpassing the previous quasi-sage ancestors of the Tiana continent. Nan Gongyan didn't expect to meet Xiaosheng here. It was as if she was in a dream. Nan Gongyan, who liked to read all kinds of ancient books, didn't know the history of the Tiana continent like the back of her hand, but she definitely knew a lot about it. According to those ancient books, the famous people of the Tiana continent, including those quasi-sages, if you asked Nan Gongyan who she worshipped the most, the answer would not be those quasi-sages, but Xiaosheng. Only Xiaosheng was worshipped by Nan Gongyan. Nan Gongyan even thought more than once that if she was born in the era of Xiaosheng, would she be like other women, hopelessly falling in love with such a man? Nan Gongyan's pair of beautiful eyes had countless little stars, but Gu Lingyao was more shocked. Hearing about Xiaosheng's experience from Nan Gongyan, Gu Lingyao was also shocked, but she didn't have the slightest admiration, because in Gu Lingyao's heart, there was only one person, and that was Xiaochen. Moreover, Gu Lingyao firmly believed that Xiaochen's future wouldn't be much worse than Xiaosheng's. He would also be able to be like Xiaosheng, leading the way in his own era, sweeping away all the holy sons and saintesses. Unlike the two women, after listening to Nan Gongyan's words, Xiaochen had an indescribable feeling in his heart. Xiaosheng was his ancestor, and he had never thought that Xiaosheng would have such a glorious past. At this time, everyone's eyes were fixed on Xiaosheng, who was fighting fiercely in the sky. Like White Bone Saint, both of them were remnant souls, and their strength was only equivalent to the Tao transformation realm. However, in the face of White Bone Saint's remnant soul, Xiaosheng's remnant soul was obviously stronger. Just now, Xiaosheng had firmly suppressed White Bone Saint. White Bone Saint was wrapped in black qi, while Xiaosheng's golden light shone brightly. The golden light that filled the sky seemed to be able to dispel the darkness, firmly suppressing White Bone Saint's black qi. In the blink of an eye, more than 100 moves had passed. At this time, Xiaosheng's palm hit White Bone Saint's chest. For a moment, White Bone Saint flew backward, and his figure became even more illusory. It seemed that he was not far from dissipating. "Give up. You're no match for me," Xiaosheng said indifferently after seriously injuring White Bone Saint with one blow. Hearing Xiaosheng's words, White Bone Saint gritted his teeth, and his eyes were full of unwillingness and anger. From Xiaosheng's words, he could hear indifference, contempt, and disdain. They were both saints, but in Xiaosheng's eyes, he, White Bone Saint, was like an ant. How could White Bone Saint accept this? Forcibly stopping himself, White Bone Saint's face gradually became hideous. He laughed wildly and said, "Ha, Xiaosheng, you want to stop me from leaving my inheritance? I won't let you have your way. Today, I'll make you watch how I leave my inheritance behind. Ha ha." As soon as he finished speaking, the black qi around White Bone Saint's body suddenly surged, and instantly enveloped Xiaosheng. At the same time, the wisp of White Bone Saint's soul also began to dissipate slowly. It was clear that he had exhausted all the energy in this wisp of Saint soul in order to deal a fatal blow to Xiaosheng. The black qi was hazy, and soon formed a black ball around Xiaosheng. Xiaosheng's figure was enveloped by the black ball. As for White Bone Saint, he had already dissipated. "Tai Saint." Seeing White Bone Saint's desperate attack, Nan Gongyan called out tearfully. It was clear that her heart was full of concern for Xiaosheng. Yi Xuan really didn't know how this little girl felt about Xiaosheng. They were not from the same era, but it seemed that Nan Gongyan was hopelessly in love with Xiaosheng. Yi Xuan couldn't confirm Xiaosheng's situation in the Black Ball. However, just as White Bone Saint exhausted the power of this wisp of Saint Soul to launch a desperate attack, on the other side, where Su Tianzi was, there was another wisp of White Bone Saint's Saint Soul. There was another wisp of White Bone Saint's Saint Soul here. When White Bone Saint died, he used a secret technique to leave behind 2 wisps of Saint Soul. Perhaps this was something Xiaosheng didn't expect. Therefore, even though Xiaosheng killed 1 wisp of Saint Soul, the remaining wisp of Saint Soul directly disappeared with Su Tianzi and went straight to the top of the black volcano. "Boy, come with me." White Bone Saint reached out his hand towards Su Tianzi, and the 2 of them immediately disappeared from the spot. Just as Su Tianzi disappeared, the black ball where Xiaosheng was gradually torn apart, and rays of golden light shot out. Finally, accompanied by a muffled sound, the black ball was completely shattered by Xiaosheng, and the white-robed figure appeared in front of everyone again. Seeing that Xiaosheng had broken the White Bone Saint's desperate attack, Nan Gongyan cried out happily, and Xiaochen secretly heaved a sigh of relief. At the same time, Xiaosheng finally surrendered his gaze to Xiaochen and the others below. The previous attack had exhausted the power of the wisp of White Bone Saint's Saint Soul. At this time, the wisp of Saint Soul had disappeared. With Xiaosheng's gaze, Nan Gongyan's face turned red, but Xiaosheng's gaze did not fall on her at all. Instead, it was fixed on Xiaochen. After a simple glance at everyone, Xiaosheng's gaze fixed on Xiaochen, and a hint of shock flashed in his eyes. Then, without any movement from Xiaosheng, Xiaosheng's figure strangely appeared in front of Xiaochen. At the same time, Xiaosheng waved his hand, and Guling Yao, Nan Gongyan, and the other Tianfeng Shengzong disciples directly fainted. Obviously, there were some words that he did not want the others to hear. After causing them to faint, Xiaosheng looked at Xiaochen and asked, "Are you from the Xiao clan of the Tianqian continent?" Xiaosheng felt a familiar bloodline aura from Xiaochen. It was an aura that only the members of the Xiao clan had. Moreover, Xiaochen's bloodline aura was extremely rich, almost comparable to Xiaosheng's. Of course, Xiaosheng's wisp of Saint Soul did not have any memories after that, and he did not know that Xiaosheng's bloodline power was originally obtained from Xiaosheng, so naturally, it was not weaker than Xiaosheng's. In the face of Xiaosheng's inquiry, Xiaochen did not deny it. He nodded and admitted his identity. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 657. Facing Xiaosheng again, Xiaochen's feelings were a little complicated. As if he had guessed Xiaochen's thoughts, Xiaosheng asked with a chuckle, "Why, have you seen me before?" Facing Xiaosheng's inquiry, Xiaochen did not hide anything and told him the truth about the Tianqian continent. After hearing Xiaochen's story, Xiaosheng fell silent. The Saint Soul in front of him was left behind by Xiaosheng when he was in the Tiana continent. It had been sleeping in the sacred tomb and had no memory of what happened after that, so it naturally did not know about the Tianqian continent and the Blood Demon continent. After learning that his physical body and body had fallen, Xiaosheng's Saint Soul was obviously not prepared. After a moment of silence, Xiaosheng sighed softly. "Is that so? Ah, it's fate." Xiaosheng didn't seem to be too sad about what Xiaochen had told him. He only said a few words faintly. Hearing this, Xiaochen did not know what to say, but at this moment, Xiaosheng suddenly smiled and said, "It seems that the Saint Soul I left behind back then was really the will of the heavens." Xiaosheng said inexplicably. Xiaochen naturally did not know what this meant because Xiaochen had not broken through to the Saint Realm, so he was very unfamiliar with everything about the Saint Realm. As everyone knew, once a cultivator broke through to the Saint Realm, it was equivalent to a sublimation of life level. Not only the physical body, but the soul would also transform into a Saint Soul. Because of the sublimation of life level, the vitality of a saint could be said to be extremely tenacious. Now that Xiaosheng had a Saint Soul left behind, it meant that he could still be resurrected. As long as there was a saint soul and some heaven-defying methods, a saint realm cultivator could be resurrected, but it was very difficult. When he was in the Tianqian continent, the saint soul that had broken through to the quasi-saint realm could also be resurrected, but there were no such treasures and opportunities in the Tianqian continent. Secondly, when the blood demon continent invaded, Xiaoqian could not stand by and watch. In order to resist the blood demon continent, Xiaoqian could only use the last of his strength. With a smile on his face, Xiaoqian looked at Xiaoqian and said, "Little guy, it seems that the heavens did not want me to die. Your ancestor still has a chance of survival," Xiaoqian said without hiding anything from Xiaoqian. Hearing this, Xiaoqian was stunned at first, but he quickly reacted and was overjoyed. Xiaoqian was his ancestor, and at the same time, the person he respected the most. If there was really a chance for him to be resurrected, Xiaoqian would naturally be happy for him. However, before Xiaoqian could be happy for long, Xiaoqian continued, "However, if I want to pursue this chance of survival, I still need a few things. These things are still out of your reach for the time being, but there is a treasure that you must obtain as soon as possible. Otherwise, this ancestor's remnant soul won't be able to hold on for long." There were many conditions for Xiaoqian to be resurrected, and Xiaoqian obviously couldn't fulfill these conditions with his current strength. Moreover, Xiaoqian, who was only a remnant soul, couldn't casually consume his own strength if he wanted to be resurrected. Otherwise, once the power of this remnant soul was exhausted, there would be nothing he could do. Xiaoqian didn't need to think about the other treasures for the time being. However, there was one thing that Xiaoqian had to get back as soon as possible. According to Xiaoqian, when he was traveling in the Tiana continent, he accidentally found a heavenly spiritual pool, and this heavenly spiritual pool was the key to whether or not Xiaoqian could be resurrected. This was because only by relying on the power of the heavenly spiritual pool could Xiaoqian use a secret technique to construct a secret realm in Xiaoqian's body, and then let his remnant soul nourish in Xiaoqian's body to ensure that the remnant soul wouldn't be destroyed. At the same time, it slowly nourished the power of the remnant soul, and then perfected his remnant soul, turning it into a real remnant soul. Only then could he prepare for his resurrection. Xiaoqian had never heard of the heavenly spiritual pool, but Xiaoqian knew about the spiritual pool. When he was in the Nine-Cloud Palace in the Tianqian continent, Xiaoqian had used the spiritual pool to cultivate. The simplest explanation for the heavenly spiritual pool was that it was an existence that was one level higher than the spiritual pool. This heavenly spiritual pool was something that he had to obtain. Fortunately, the location of the heavenly spiritual pool that Xiaoqian had discovered was extremely secretive. It shouldn't have fallen into the hands of any forces, which saved him a lot of trouble. He didn't intend to tell anyone about his existence. After all, Xiaoqian could be said to be powerless now, and the only person he could trust was Xiaoqian. He told Xiaoqian his thoughts. Hearing this, Xiaoqian nodded and said, "Then let's go back to Tianfeng Zone first, and then I'll go to the heavenly spiritual pool with the ancestor. We'll get the heavenly spiritual pool first." Hearing Xiaoqian's words, Xiaoqian smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. We're not in a hurry, but I'm afraid I'll have to rely on your body for a long time. Also, don't tell anyone about me. It won't do you any good," Xiaoqian reminded. A remnant soul was very attractive to a cultivator, so before Xiaoqian was resurrected, or before he had the ability to protect himself, he couldn't reveal his existence. Hearing Xiaoqian's reminder, Xiaoqian nodded and agreed. Then the two of them talked for a while. Finally, Xiaoqian entered Xiaoqian's body and used Xiaoqian's body as a safe haven for his divine soul. He didn't expect to be able to see Xiaoqian again, and Xiaoqian actually had the possibility of being resurrected. Xiaoqian's heart was filled with mixed feelings, but he was also happy. However, there were many difficulties in resurrecting Xiaoqian. Just now, Xiaoqian had briefly mentioned a few treasures needed for his resurrection. These treasures were the most precious things in the world, and most of them were in the hands of the ancient sacred sect. The ancient sacred sect was more powerful than Tianfeng Zone. It could be said that it was the real overlord of the Tiana continent. In Tianfeng Zone, there was only one saint, the Tianfeng saint. Although the number of saints in the ancient sacred sect was uncertain, it was definitely more than one. This was because the ancient sacred sect already had as many as 3 saints, and these were only the saints that the ancient sacred sect put on the surface. It was unknown whether there were other saints in the ancient sacred sect in the dark. The treasures needed to resurrect Shaoxing could be regarded as the most precious treasures in the ancient sacred sect. Therefore, it was no different from a fool's dream for Shaoqin to obtain these treasures from the ancient sacred sect. Even if he broke through to the saint realm, it would be very difficult for him to obtain them. However, even if there was only a glimmer of hope, Shaoqin didn't want to give up. He wanted to resurrect Shaoxing. Moreover, Shaoxing had said that as long as Shaoqin could find the heavenly spiritual pool, Shaoxing's divine soul could be slowly nourished in Shaoqin's body. In this way, Shaoqin would have a lot of time to prepare other treasures. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 658. Using Shaoqin's body as an attachment, it could be said that Shaoqin's body was the home of Shaoxing's remnant soul. At least before he was resurrected, he needed to survive in Shaoqin's body. However, this was not without benefits for Shaoqin. The biggest benefit was naturally in terms of cultivation. As the strongest saint in the Tiana continent, the cultivation methods and martial skills in Shaoxing's remnant soul were of great help to Shaoqin. Moreover, Shaoxing and Shaoqin were both sword cultivators. For Shaoqin, this was simply like a fish in water. Okay, little guy, let's leave. This holy mausoleum has no value, and the inheritance of this white bone is useless to you. In his mind, Shaoxing's voice sounded. Hearing this, Shaoqin nodded slightly. At the same time, Guling Yao, Nangong Yan, and the others also woke up one after another. Just now, everyone had been knocked unconscious by Shaoxing. Now that they had woken up, the first thing Nangong Yan asked about was Shaoxing. Looking at Shaoqin, Nangong Yan asked nervously, "Senior Shaoqin, where's the Tai Saint, Senior Shaoxing?" They had already looked around, but they could not find Shaoxing. In this regard, Shaoqin naturally could not tell Nangong Yan that Shaoxing was in his body. He could only find a random reason. Senior Shaoxing has disappeared. After all, he is just a remnant soul, Shaoqin replied. Hearing that Shaoxing had disappeared, Nangong Yan could not help but feel disappointed. After a moment of silence, she said, "Then what did Senior Shaoxing say to you just now?" "Nothing, he just told us to leave this place as soon as possible," Shaoqin replied. Now that Shaoxing had disappeared, everyone naturally left the holy mausoleum under Shaoqin's lead. At first glance, Shaoqin did not seem to have obtained anything in the holy mausoleum of the White Bone Saint. In fact, Shaoqin's harvest this time could be said to be extremely rich. Because he had met Shaoxing, not only did Shaoqin see the hope of Shaoxing's resurrection, but with Shaoxing by his side, the inheritance of the White Bone Saint could not compare to the benefits. There was no doubt that the White Bone Saint and the Tai Saint were stronger. With Shaoxing, of course, only a fool. Tianzi. Su Tianzi was probably still excited about obtaining the inheritance of the White Bone Saint. He did not know that the real big opportunity had already been taken away by Shaoqin. Under Shaoxing's command, the group safely left the holy mausoleum of the White Bone Saint. Everyone sighed when they returned to the Fengyue Mountains. "Okay, I should leave the Fengyue Mountains too," Shaoqin said to everyone. Hearing this, everyone nodded. Seeing this, Shaoqin looked at Nangong Yan and Guling Yao and told them about Li Guden and his father. Shaoqin's intention was very simple. He wanted Li Guden and his father to leave the Fengyue Mountains. He hoped that Tianfeng Zone would remove the arrest warrant for them. This matter wasn't difficult for Nangong Yan. With the strength of the Nangong family and Nangong Yi, an elder of the Glory sect, she only needed to say a word to settle the matter of Li Guden and his son. Nangong Yan agreed to Shaoqin's request immediately. She promised that once they returned to family Nangong, she would send people to pick up Li Guden and his father. At the same time, Nangongyi would remove the arrest warrant for Li Guden and his father as an elder of Glory sect. Gu Lingyao also agreed to talk to her father, Gu Qi, to let Li Guden's father become an elder of Tianqi sect. As for Li Guden, he could also enter Tianqi sect to cultivate. With the matter of Li Guden and his father settled, the group followed the original route and left the Fengyue Mountains. Without Su Tianzi causing trouble, the group did not meet with any danger along the way. After a few days, the group entered the southern region of Tianfeng Mansion. Then, they used the teleportation portal and returned to Nangong City where family Nangong was located. Nangong City was the headquarters of family Nangong. When Xiao Chen and the group walked out of the teleportation portal, the head of family Nangong, who was also Nangong Yan's father, was already waiting for them. Nangong Yan's father was called Nangong Tian. Seeing that his daughter was safe and sound, Nangong Tian finally revealed a smile on his face. The father and daughter hugged each other and comforted the Nangong Yan. Then, Nangong Tian turned his gaze to Xiao Chen and the rest. The smile on his face did not fade. He walked up to Xiao Chen and said gently, "You must be Xiao Chen, my dear nephew. Thank you so much for saving my daughter's life." Evidently, he had heard about Xiao Chen from Nangong Yi. He also knew that Xiao Chen was the 10th direct disciple of Tianfeng Xingzong. Hence, Xiao Chen replied politely to Nangong Tian's thanks. Just like that, the group stayed at family Nangong. That night, Nangong Tian held a banquet to thank Xiao Chen. During the banquet, Nangong Tian also made it clear that if Xiao Chen needed any help, family Nangong would definitely help him as long as it was within their means. Obviously, it was to thank Xiao Chen for saving the Nangong Yan. After the banquet, Xiao Chen returned to his courtyard. At this moment, Xiao Xing's voice rang in his mind. "Little brat, this family Nangong is quite powerful. Since that's the case, you can ask them to help you collect some heavenly treasures that you need." Xiao Xing requested the family Nangong to help him find some heavenly treasures. Xiao Chen did not reject his request. Under Xiao Xing's instructions, Xiao Chen memorized dozens of heavenly treasures and elixirs. Some of these items were needed by Xiao Xing, while some were needed by Xiao Chen for his cultivation. Of course, Xiao Xing was the one who told Xiao Chen about these items. It was indeed very troublesome for Xiao Chen to collect these items by himself. However, it would be much easier with the help of the family Nangong. Furthermore, Xiao Chen was not asking for free. He was only asking the family Nangong for help. After they found them, Xiao Chen would naturally buy them at the market price. Therefore, the family Nangong had no reason to reject his request. After memorizing the dozens of heavenly treasures, Xiao Chen told Nangong Tian about it the next day. In the end, Nangong Tian agreed to Xiao Chen's request after a casual glance. Although the items that Xiao Chen needed were very precious, they were not considered priceless treasures. Therefore, Nangong Tian agreed without hesitation. After all, this was a very simple matter for the family Nangong. After staying at the family Nangong for 3 days, Xiao Chen and the rest were preparing to return to Tianfeng Xingzong. Before they left, the Nangong Yan personally sent Xiao Chen to the teleportation formation. Looking at Xiao Chen, the Nangong Yan said with a smile, "Senior Xiao Chen, I will go to Tianfeng Xingzong to look for you and Senior Gu soon. You have to protect me then. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 659. Nangong Yan was not a disciple of Tianfeng Xingzong. After all, families were different from sections. For sects like the Iron Sword sect, their disciples would usually join Tianfeng Xingzong. However, family Nangong was different. Their disciples, especially their direct descendants, would usually choose to stay in the family to cultivate. That was why Nangong Yan did not join Tianfeng Xingzong. However, after what happened this time, she suddenly decided to join Tianfeng Xingzong. Nangong Tian was a little helpless about this. Unfortunately, he could not resist Nangong Yan's coaxing and pestering. In the end, he could only nod and agree. As the eldest daughter of family Nangong, it was not difficult for Nangong Yan to join Tianfeng Xingzong to cultivate. After all, Nangong was an elder of Tianfeng Xingzong. Although he did not have any real power, he could arrange for one person to join Tianfeng Xingzong. Hearing Nangong Yan's words, Xiaochen smiled and nodded. Okay, I'll treat you to a big meal at the Cool Breeze restaurant when you come. Cool Breeze restaurant? You said it yourself. You can't go back on your words. Hearing this, Nangong Yan was delighted. She had heard of the Cool Breeze restaurant before, so she naturally knew that the dishes and wine there were very unusual. After making the agreement, Xiaochen and Gu Lingyao stepped into the transmitting formation and headed for Southern Border City. In Southern Border City, Xiaochen was warmly received by family Nangong Yi. Nangong Yi also told Xiaochen about Li Guden and his son. He told Xiaochen that their arrest warrant had been lifted and that family Nangong's people were already on their way to Fenghua Mountains. When they arrived, family Nangong would arrange for them to be escorted to the Tianqi sect. Xiaochen naturally expressed his gratitude. As for Li Guden, Xiaochen might not have anything to do with him in the future. However, Li Guden and his son were not bad people, so it was not a problem for Xiaochen to help them. After staying in Southern Border City for only one night, Xiaochen and his people returned to Tianfeng Prefecture City the next morning. This time, they did not stay in Tianfeng Prefecture City. They directly returned to Tianfeng Xingzong. After sending Gu Lingyao back, Xiaochen brought the disciples to Yifeng and told them everything that had happened in Fenghua Mountains, including the White-Boned Saint's sacred tomb and how he had killed 5 disciples. Yifeng obviously did not care that Xiaochen had killed 5 ordinary disciples in the sacred mausoleum of the White-Boned Saint. He cared more about the sacred mausoleum of the White-Boned Saint. After hearing Xiaochen's story, Yifeng thought to himself, I didn't expect the White-Boned Saint's sacred tomb to be in Fenghua Mountains. It seems that I have to inform the Lord's Sacred Master about this. The matter of the Saint Mausoleum was no small matter, so Yifeng took it very seriously. However, Xiaochen knew very well that the Saint Mausoleum of the White-Boned Saint could no longer be opened because there was no key. The only way to open the mausoleum was if a saint forcibly tore the space apart, but that had nothing to do with Xiaochen. As for how Tianfeng Xingzong was going to deal with the sacred tomb of the White-Boned Saint, Xiaochen did not care. After briefing Yifeng, Xiaochen took his leave. Yifeng hurried to the Tianfeng Saint's residence. The Tianfeng Saint's residence had been moved to the personal disciples area. On the way back, Xiaochen sighed. Tianfeng Xingzong? I didn't know about it before, but I do know about the Tianfeng Saint. I didn't expect that kid to have broken through to the Saint realm. Xiaoxing had never heard of Tianfeng Xingzong. In his era, there was no Tianfeng Xingzong, but Xiaoxing knew about the Tianfeng Saint. However, from Xiaoxing's tone, it was not difficult to tell that the Tianfeng Saint was just a child in Xiaoxing's eyes. After being away for some time, Xiaochen finally returned to Tianfeng Xingzong. It was rare for Xiaochen to be able to relax. He returned to his residence, which was the residence of the 10th personal disciple. Seeing that Xiaochen had returned, the 4 maids were very happy. Originally, Xiaoxing planned to go to the Heavenly Spirit Lake immediately, but he asked Xiaochen to wait for a few days. After all, thousands of years had passed, and the Tiana continent had undergone earth-shaking changes. Xiaoxing still needed to follow the current map of the Tiana continent to find the exact location of the Heavenly Spirit Lake. After asking Xiaochen to be patient, Xiaochen was able to relax for the next few days. Every day, apart from cultivating, he spent time with the little girl, Gu Lingyao. It was worth mentioning that during this period, Nangong Yan had successfully entered Tianfeng Xingzong, but he was just an ordinary disciple. Nangong Yan didn't care about this, and Xiaochen also kept his promise and invited Nangong Yan, Gu Lingyao, Mu Feng, and other good friends to have a big meal together at the Qingfeng restaurant. The days passed very peacefully, and during these days, in addition to constantly searching for the whereabouts of the Heavenly Spirit Lake through the records, Xiaoxing was also shocked by Xiaochen's cultivation talent. At first, he only thought that Xiaochen's talent was not bad, but later, Xiaoxing was completely sure that Xiao Chen's talent had definitely reached the level of the Holy Sun, or even higher. Even compared to Xiaoxing, Xiao Chen's talent was definitely above the first tier. In other words, Xiao Chen's talent was above Xiaoxing's. At the same time, Xiaoxing was even more shocked by Xiao Chen's tempered battle body and heavenly sword embryo. Xiaoxing didn't know much about the heavenly sword embryo, but he was very clear that the heavenly sword embryo was simply the strongest physique for a sword cultivator. Compared to the heavenly sword embryo, Xiaoxing knew a lot about the tempered battle body. It was the strongest body refining technique in the Tiana continent, and this was not just for show. After knowing these two secrets of Xiaochen, even Xiaoxing couldn't help but sigh. "You little brat, I really don't know what kind of luck you have to be able to obtain such a peerless opportunity." Needless to say, the heavenly sword embryo, but this tempered battle body, TSK, it seems that it won't be long before the holy sons and holy daughters of the Tiana continent will suffer again. Think about it, if they know that in addition to me, Xiaoxing, an even more abnormal monster has appeared in the Xiao clan. At that time, the holy sons and holy daughters of the same generation won't be able to raise their heads. Interesting. Xiaoxing was sure that as long as Xiaochen was given a little more time, Xiaochen would definitely be able to reach his former height, or even more abnormal. In the past, Xiaoxing suppressed all the holy sons and holy daughters of the Tiana continent with his own strength. Now, Xiaoxing seemed to be able to see Xiaochen, just like himself, ruthlessly trampling the holy sons and holy daughters of this era under his feet, leading the glory of an era alone. Xiaoxing laughed happily. Hearing this, Xiaochen was also curious and couldn't help but ask, "Old ancestor, are the holy sons and holy daughters of the Tiana continent very powerful? How do they compare to the personal disciples of Tian Fengxing Zone? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation." End of chapter. Chapter 660. Xiaochen had heard a lot of rumors about the holy sons and holy daughters, but he had never come into contact with them. Therefore, Xiaochen was very curious about the holy sons and holy daughters of the Tiana continent. However, after hearing Xiaochen's words, Xiaoxing curled his lips and said, "Kid, don't take my word for it. I only said that you are talented, but with your current strength, you are nothing compared to the son of Saint. You can't be compared at all." Xiaoxing was not afraid of hurting Xiaochen's feelings, and he spoke bluntly. The gap between the holy sons and holy daughters was equivalent to the gap between the holy sons and the king of geniuses. In the Tian Fengxing Zone, the king of geniuses could only become a core disciple. The gap between the holy sons and holy daughters was even greater than the gap between the holy sons and the king of geniuses. One must know that those who could become the holy sons and holy daughters naturally had the best talent, at least in the Tiana continent. Moreover, to cultivate a holy son, the amount of resources needed was simply an astronomical figure. As for the astronomical level, let's put it this way, Tian Fengxing Zone was powerful enough, right? It was the absolute overlord of the Tianfeng prefecture, but even if Tian Fengxing Zone went bankrupt and spent all the resources in the sect on one person, it still wouldn't be enough to cultivate a holy son. With the strength of Tian Fengxing Zone, it couldn't even cultivate a holy son. Therefore, in the entire Tiana continent, the only sect with a holy son and holy daughter was a true overlord like the ancient sage sect. A holy son or holy daughter was not something that could be cultivated with talent and hard work. It also required countless resources. The three most important factors for a warrior's cultivation were talent, hard work, and cultivation resources. If one wanted to become a holy son or holy daughter, it could be said that all three were indispensable. After hearing Xiaoxing's merciless explanation, Xiaochen was not depressed at all. On the contrary, he was a little excited. So, in order to become a holy son or holy daughter, one must enter the ancient sage sect? In Tian Fengxing Zone, I won't be able to become the holy son even if I spend my whole life. Is that so, ancestor? Yes, you have to go to the ancient sacred sect. Not only that, You have to make the upper echelons of the ancient sacred sect value you and be willing to use all their resources on you. Only then will you have a chance to become a holy son, Shaoxing said with certainty. Ancestor, did you also join a sect like the ancient saint sect to become the holy son? Shaoxing continued to ask. According to Shaoxing, cultivation resources were indispensable if one wanted to become a holy son. Back then, Shaoxing had come to the Tiana continent alone. Therefore, he was able to suppress all the holy sons and holy daughters of that era. It was obvious that Shaoxing had joined a sect comparable to an ancient sacred sect. In the face of Xiao Chen's question, Shaoxing fell into silence this time, as if he did not want to recall this matter. After a while, Shaoxing replied faintly. Yes, I did once join a sect comparable to the ancient sacred sect. He admitted Xiao Chen's guess, but did not say much. Seeing this, Xiao Chen did not ask any more questions. In the courtyard, Shaoxing and Xiao Chen both fell into silence. Perhaps because the atmosphere was a little awkward, Shaoxing deliberately laughed loudly and said, "Don't think so much, kid. You are still far from becoming a holy son or holy daughter. Just talking about the top 10 direct disciples of Tianfeng Xingzong, you are now ranked at the bottom. When you become the first direct disciple, you can think about becoming a holy son or holy daughter." As soon as Shaoxing's voice fell, Gu Lingyao came to the door. In the past few days, Gu Lingyao came to Xiao Chen every day. Skipping into the courtyard, Gu Lingyao said to Xiao Chen with a smile, "Big brother Xiao Chen, are you cultivating?" "Yeah." "Why are you here?" Xiao Chen replied after hearing the question. I'm bored. Can you accompany me to the Tianfeng prefecture for a stroll?" "I've been bored to death these past few days," said Gu Lingyao coquettishly. This little girl was born with an unstable personality. While the two of them were talking, Shaoxing, who was inside Xiao Chen's body, revealed a solemn expression and muttered softly. "Don't tell me this little girl is..." Shaoxing seemed to have noticed something from Gu Lingyao, but he did not say it because he himself was not sure. While Xiao Chen was enjoying a rare moment of peace, far away from the ancient holy state, on another territory of the Sky River mainland, there was a group of majestic palaces surrounded by mountains. The palaces seemed to be scattered everywhere, but every building emitted a faint white radiance as though they were shrines. One couldn't help but want to bow down and worship them. In the most majestic hall in the center of the group of palaces, several illusory figures clad in silver moon robes gathered together. Their faces couldn't be seen clearly, but their bodies were enveloped in a layer of golden light. They sat together in a circle and one of them said indifferently, "There's news. That little girl is in Tianfeng Xingzong." "Tianfeng Xingzong? Is it in the territory of the ancient holy state?" Another person asked. "Yes, it's about time. That little girl has had enough of being crazy. It's time to bring her back." "Yes, then let Yunwan take her there." They seemed to be talking casually, but in the end, a young girl also clad in silver moon robes strode into the hall. The young girl was tall and slender. Her appearance could not be said to be beautiful, but the domineering aura that involuntarily exuded from between her brows was eye-catching. As a woman, she had a domineering aura that made men concede defeat. From this, one could see how extraordinary she was. With a calm expression, the young girl came to the hall and bowed to the illusory figures in front of her. "Greetings, sacred masters. Yunwan, go to the Heavenly Wind Saint sect immediately and bring that little girl back," one of the figures said after hearing Yunwan's words. "Yes." Yunwan simply nodded in response, then turned and left the hall. This group of palaces was like a paradise. It was the location of one of the 4 major sects of the Sky River mainland, the Sacredine sect. Yunwan was the Sacredine sect's saintess. The Sacredine sect was a powerful sect on the same level as the ancient holy state. It ruled over one of the 4 major provinces of the Sky River mainland, the Sacredine province. The illusory figures in silver moon robes were all saints. There were actually 3 saints. As for the little girl they were talking about, it was actually none other than Gu Lingyao. However, Xiaochen, who was far away in Tianfengsheng Zone, obviously did not know about the Sacredine sect's actions. He did not expect that it would not be long before the greatest humiliation of Xiaochen's life would befall him. And the instigator of all this was the overlord of the Sky River mainland, the Sacredine sect, and the unattainable saintess, Yung Wan. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 661. Xiaochen naturally didn't know about the actions of the Sacredine sect. After several days of peace, Xiaosheng finally found the location of the heavenly spiritual pool. However, after finding the location of the heavenly spiritual pool, Xiaosheng didn't show the slightest hint of joy. On the contrary, his expression was solemn. In the room, Xiaochen and Xiaosheng sat opposite each other. Facing the illusory figure of Xiaosheng, Xiaochen looked at the map on the table and frowned. "Old ancestor, what's wrong?" Early in the morning, Xiaosheng had told him that he had found the location of the heavenly spiritual pool. It should have been something to be happy about, but Xiaosheng's expression was solemn, which made Xiaochen somewhat puzzled. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Xiaosheng said softly, "The location of the heavenly spiritual pool should be in the Wind Plains. You should have heard of the Wind Plains, right?" In the Wind Plains, Xiaochen was stunned when he heard Xiaosheng's words. However, Xiaochen quickly understood why Xiaosheng was acting like this. In the Heavenly Wind Mansion, the Wind Plains was definitely the most famous place. As for the reason, it wasn't because of the scenery or anything else, but because of the dangers of the Wind Plains. Simply put, the Wind Plains was a plain. However, compared to ordinary plains, the Wind Plains was filled with strong winds that could tear a cultivator's body to shreds. Strong winds blew all year round in the Wind Plains, and these strong winds could be said to be sharp blades. Cultivators below the Tao King realm would die upon contact. As for cultivators above the Tao King realm, they could only move around the periphery of the Wind Plains. There were even rumors that even saints didn't dare to casually enter the Wind Plains. This was because the closer one was to the center of the Wind Plains, the stronger the wind would be. It was known as one of the 4 great death zones of the Heavenly River continent and the most dangerous place in the ancient Saint province. With the heavenly spiritual pool being located in such a place, Xiaochen had no way of going there. With Xiaochen's cultivation, he would probably be torn to pieces the moment he stepped into the Wind Plains. It was because of this that Xiaosheng's expression was so solemn. If he wanted to revive, he first needed the heavenly spiritual pool. Although he knew the exact location of the heavenly spiritual pool, Xiaochen had no way of entering it. A solemn expression was also revealed on their faces as the two of them descended into silence. This feeling was as though there was a piece of fatty meat placed in front of you, but you were unable to obtain it. It caused one to feel extremely unwilling, but there was nothing one could do about it. After a moment of silence, Xiaochen was the first to break the silence. "Old ancestor, do you know the location of other heavenly spiritual pools?" Since he couldn't obtain this heavenly spiritual pool, Xiaochen naturally wanted to find other heavenly spiritual pools. Hearing this, Xiaosheng smiled helplessly. "Do you think this heavenly spiritual pool is cabbage? Even spiritual pools are extremely rare, let alone heavenly spiritual pools. In the entire Heavenly River continent, the number of heavenly spiritual pools can be counted on one hand. Not to mention that I don't know the location of other heavenly spiritual pools. Even if I knew, I'm afraid you wouldn't be able to do anything. Either it's in a death zone like this heavenly spiritual pool, or it's under the control of a powerful sect like the Ancient Saint sect." It was impossible for him to have any ideas about the other heavenly spiritual pools. Xiaosheng directly cut off Xiaochen's idea. Since it was impossible to find other heavenly spiritual pools, there were only 2 paths in front of him. He could either give up or find a way to enter the Wind Plain. However, entering the Wind Plain was easier said than done. "Old ancestor, is there no way to enter the Wind Plain?" Xiaochen looked at Xiaosheng and asked again. "If you break through to the Saint realm, there may be a glimmer of hope." Xiaosheng replied. "If I break through to the Saint realm, I may be able to enter the wind plane. Hearing this, Xiaochen was speechless. He was only at the beginning of the Dao Vindication realm. He was still far from the Saint realm. Not to mention other things, even if he waited until he broke through to the Saint realm, Xiaosheng's Saint soul would have already turned into thin air. It seemed that even Xiaosheng didn't have any way. Xiaochen was also in despair. However, at this moment, Xiaosheng's extremely solemn face suddenly revealed a smile. Actually, there is another way, but it needs to be prepared. Xiaosheng deliberately kept Xiaochen in suspense. Hearing this, Xiaochen immediately said angrily, "Old ancestor, are you joking with me?" Ha! Hearing this, Xiaosheng laughed heartily. He didn't care about Xiaochen's dissatisfaction at all. In fact, the other method that Xiaosheng mentioned was not easy. If one couldn't withstand the strong wind of the wind plane with their cultivation, then they could only rely on external forces. There were only two kinds of external forces. One was a defensive spiritual treasure, and the other was a talisman. There was no need to talk about defensive spiritual treasures. According to Xiaosheng, as long as it was a defensive spiritual treasure above the heaven level, he should get as many as he could. The more, the better. As for talismans, in Xiaosheng's memory, there was only one type of talisman that could withstand the strong wind of the wind plane. It was called the Black Armor Talisman. It was a saint-level defensive talisman. However, to refine this Black Armor Talisman, not only did it require a saint-level talisman master, but the materials needed were also extremely complicated and expensive. Therefore, it would not be easy to obtain the Black Armor Talisman. There was a way, but it would take some effort to obtain these things. Xiaochen's intention was to find them for himself through the Tianqi sect and family Nangong. At the same time, Xiaochen also tried to talk to Tianfeng Xingzong to see if Tianjin Xingzong could provide these things for him. Xiaosheng naturally had no objections to Xiaochen's idea. After all, Xiaochen could only rely on the three major forces, Tianfeng Xingzong, Tianqi sect, and family Nangong. However, according to Xiaosheng's idea, only Tianjin Xingzong was willing to help could he obtain the Black Armor Talisman. The Tianqi sect and family Nangong's strength alone did not have much hope. Xiaochen was thinking about how to obtain the Black Armor Talisman and some defensive spiritual treasures. Just like that, 3 days passed. On this day, Xiaochen and Gu Lingyao were chatting in the courtyard. However, on the peak of Tianfeng's sacred mountain, a few guests had come from afar. In the main hall at the center of the peak of Tianfeng's sacred mountain, Tianfeng's saint sat on the main seat while Yifeng sat below him. In the center of the hall, 5 young girls stood proudly. The leader wore a silver moon robe and exuded a faint domineering aura. This group of people was none other than the disciples of Sacredine sect. The leader of the group was the Holy Maiden of Sacredine sect, Yunluan. Holy Maiden Yunluan, why have you come all the way to Tianfeng Xingzong? Tianfeng's saint looked at Yunluan and asked indifferently. Even as a saint, Tianfeng's saint could not ignore Yunluan. After all, she was the Holy Maiden of Sacredine sect. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 662. The holy sons and saintesses were unreachable existences for all cultivators on the Tianhe continent. What were the holy sons and saintesses? In layman's terms, they were the younger generation who were certain to break through to the saint realm. Wasn't that a bit boastful? There were actually people in the world who dared to say that they could break through to the saint realm, but that was the truth. The holy sons and holy daughters of the 4 sacred sects of the Tianhe continent were all from the younger generation who could become saints with a 100% chance. As for the reason, it was very simple. It was because every holy son and saintess had comprehended the power of law. The energy of the laws was the greatest barrier to break through into the saint realm. Under normal circumstances, one would at least have to attain a cultivation at the half-saint realm in order to comprehend the energy of the laws. As for those personal disciples in existences with extraordinary natural talent, they would only have the opportunity to comprehend the energy of the laws when they attained the Tao Emperor realm at the earliest. But what about the holy sons and saintesses? Their cultivation might only be at the Tao King realm or the Tao Transformation realm, but through some heaven-defying means of the four great sacred sects, they had already comprehended the power of law. If they were able to comprehend the power of laws at this stage, then the holy sons and holy daughters would be able to break through to the saint realm in advance. As such, they only needed to slowly raise their cultivation base and let their bodies and souls complete the transformation, and they would definitely become a saint. Moreover, because the holy sons and saintesses had comprehended the power of law at a very early age, once they broke through to the saint realm, their comprehension and control of the power of law would obviously be far superior to ordinary saints. This was why the saints of the four great sacred sects were not only numerous, but also far stronger than ordinary saints. The holy sons and saintesses could be said to be future saints, so Saint Tianfeng naturally couldn't ignore them. Therefore, when he heard that Saintess Yunluan had arrived, Saint Tianfeng personally came out to receive her. Facing Saint Tianfeng's inquiry, Yunluan, who was in the center of the hall, remained calm. She didn't show the slightest bit of nervousness or panic because she was facing a saint. She calmly said, "Junior has come under the orders of the sect to ask for a person from Tianfeng Xingzong." "Oh, who is it?" "Guling Yao." Without beating around the bush, Yunluan directly stated the purpose of her visit. She had traveled thousands of miles from the Sacredine Prefecture to the ancient Saint Prefecture's Tianfeng Prefecture just for Guling Yao. After hearing Yunluan's reply, the Tianfeng saint didn't seem to care about Guling Yao at all. He turned his head and looked at Yifeng. This Guling Yao is a new core disciple. He truthfully told Saint Tianfeng about Guling Yao's identity. Hearing this, Saint Tianfeng's expression didn't change, but in his heart, he had already decided to hand Guling Yao over to Yunluan. After all, Yunluan was representing the Sacredine sect. Although he didn't know why the Sacredine sect wanted to take away Guling Yao, Tianfeng Xingzong obviously couldn't offend the Sacredine sect for Guling Yao. Moreover, with Tianfeng Xingzong's strength, there was no way he could refuse in front of the Sacredine sect, unless Tianfeng Xingzong asked for help from the ancient saint sect. However, it wasn't worth it, and whether the ancient saint sect would help was another matter altogether. In short, Guling Yao wasn't worth Tianfeng Xingzong offending the Sacredine sect for her. The Tianfeng saint had already made up his mind, but what he didn't expect was that Yifeng had only said half of what he had said, making it seem as if the Tianfeng saint had already made up his mind. Yifeng continued. "Lord Saint Tianfeng, Guling Yao is actually the fiancé of the 10th direct disciple, Xiao Chen. The two of them are both from the Celestial Equal sect. Guling Yao and Xiao Chen's relationship wasn't a secret to begin with. Moreover, as the Grand Elder of Tianfeng Xingzong, Yifeng was well aware of this matter." Hearing this, Saint Tianfeng was slightly taken aback. Xiao Chen's fiancé? Saint Tianfeng vaguely felt that this matter might be a little troublesome. Saint Tianfeng naturally had a deep influence on Xiao Chen. It could even be said that Saint Tianfeng had been secretly observing Xiao Chen. Now that he heard that Guling Yao was Xiao Chen's woman and that the Sacredine sect wanted to take Guling Yao away, Saint Tianfeng was somewhat depressed. Based on Saint Tianfeng's understanding of Xiao Chen clearly wouldn't agree to let the Sacredine sect take away Guling Yao. After pondering for a moment, Saint Tianfeng looked at Yunluan and said, "Saintess Yunluan, Guling Yao is a core disciple of Tianfeng Xingzong. If you want to take her away, you must have a reason, right?" When it came to Xiao Chen, the Tianfeng saint felt a little helpless. However, Yunluan said indifferently, "I've already said that this is an order from the sect." "Tianfeng saint, isn't this a reason? Or are you going to refuse?" When facing Saint Tianfeng, Yunluan's words actually contained a hint of threat. It was as if she was saying that if Tianfeng Xingzong dared to refuse, then prepare to face the wrath of the Sacredine sect. Saint Tianfeng naturally wasn't afraid of Yunluan. Even if she was a saintess, she was still too young and Saint Tianfeng could casually crush her. However, Yunluan was backed by the Sacredine sect, so Saint Tianfeng had no choice but to hold back. Furthermore, Yun Luan was a saintess, so Saint Tianfeng couldn't do anything to Yun Luan. If he dared to do anything to a saintess, he would be courting death. Seeing that Yun Luan was determined to do this, Saint Tianfeng didn't hesitate. After weighing the pros and cons, Saint Tianfeng finally decided that he couldn't provoke the sacred insect. If that's the case, please wait for a moment. I'll have someone bring Gu Lingyao here. Thank you, Lord Saint Tianfeng. Yun Luan bowed and thanked Saint Tianfeng. Tianfeng Xingzong then asked Yifeng to personally bring Gu Lingyao here. He also explained to Xiaochen the stakes and told him that Gu Lingyao going to the sacred insect wasn't a bad thing. It could even be said that it was an opportunity for her. He also asked Xiaochen not to stop her. Without knowing the reason why the sacred insect had their eyes on Gu Lingyao, it was naturally a great opportunity in the eyes of others. Unfortunately, for Gu Lingyao, it wasn't an opportunity, but a disaster. It could also be said that it was fate. After receiving Saint Tianfeng's order, Yifeng immediately left the main hall and quickly arrived at Xiaochen's residence. Xiaochen, who was cultivating in the courtyard, saw Yifeng personally come and bowed in confusion. First Elder. Facing Xiaochen, Yifeng smiled slightly. At the same time, he unconsciously glanced at Gu Lingyao. Only then did he speak to Xiaochen. Xiaochen, I'm here to look for Gu Lingyao. Look for Lingyao? May I know what you're here for, First Elder? Xiaochen asked curiously. Faced with Xiaochen's question, First Elder laughed loudly. Ha, of course it's a good thing. Gu Lingyao's great opportunity has arrived. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 663. Because Yun Luan didn't explain why the sacred insect wanted to take Gu Lingyao away, Yifeng felt that this might be a great opportunity for Gu Lingyao. After all, the sacred insect was one of the 4 sacred sects of the Tiana mainland. If Gu Lingyao could cultivate in the sacred insect, it would be 1,000 times better than staying in Tianfeng Xingzong. Hearing Yifeng's words, Xiaochen and Gu Lingyao looked at each other. Then, Xiaochen asked, Please explain, Great Elder. For a moment, they didn't understand what Yifeng meant. After hearing Xiaochen's words, Yifeng told Xiaochen and Gu Lingyao the truth about Yun Luan and the others. Hearing that the sacred insect wanted to take away Gu Lingyao, Xiaochen's eyes flashed with surprise. He already knew from Yifeng that the sacred insect was in existence on the same level as the ancient sacred sects. For such a powerful sect to take away Gu Lingyao without giving a reason, it was really hard to understand. However, while Xiaochen and Gu Lingyao were puzzled, Xiaoxing inside Xiaochen's body frowned and said, The sacred insect sent people? As expected, this little lass. Hearing that the sacred insect had sent people, Xiaoxing seemed to have confirmed something, and his expression became incomparably solemn. Unaware of Xiaoxing's thoughts, Xiaochen and Gu Lingyao looked at each other. To be honest, Xiaochen also felt that the arrival of Yun Luan and the others was an opportunity for Gu Lingyao. However, before Xiaochen could speak, Xiaoxing's voice rang in his mind. Kid, this isn't an opportunity, but a desperate situation. Run as far as you can, unless you don't want this little girl to live. Xiaoxing asked Xiaochen to run away with Gu Lingyao. Hearing that, Xiaochen was confused. What was going on? He immediately sent a voice transmission to Xiaoxing. Ancestor, what do you mean? Is sacred insect here to return Lingyao? From Xiaoxing's words, Xiaochen could tell that the sacred insect had not come with good intentions. However, in the face of Xiaochen's question, Xiaoxing did not explain too much and only said in a heavy tone. Don't ask so much. If you want that lass to live, you'd better run. If that lass really comes to Saint Insect, I'm afraid she won't be able to survive. You'd better. Sigh, is it too late? There was a trace of urgency in Xiaoxing's words. Now was not the time to explain these things to Xiaochen. However, before he could finish his sentence, Xiaoxing sighed softly. It was still too late. As soon as Xiaoxing finished speaking, Yun Luan and the 4 Sacredine sect disciples had already appeared in front of Xiao Chen and the others. Looking at Yun Luan and the others, Xiao Chen could already guess their identities without needing Yifeng to say anything. They were obviously from Sacredine sect. Yun Luan did not care about Xiao Chen at all. She looked directly at Gu Lingyao and said with a cold glint in her eyes, "You're Gu Lingyao." In Yun Luan's eyes, there was only Gu Lingyao. She did not care about anyone else. Facing Yun Luan's calm and incomparably arrogant attitude, Xiao Chen's expression gradually turned cold. If it wasn't for Xiao Sheng, perhaps Xiao Chen would think that Sacredine sect's arrival was indeed an opportunity for Gu Lingyao. But now, after hearing Xiao Sheng's words, although Xiao Sheng did not explain anything, Xiao Chen was certain that Sacredine sect's arrival was not an opportunity for Gu Lingyao, but a disaster. Xiao Chen did not have the slightest suspicion towards Xiao Sheng. He had no reason to harm him. Looking coldly at the 5 people led by Yun Luan, Xiao Chen asked, "Why do you want to bring Lingyao to Sacredine sect?" Xiao Chen's sudden question caused Yun Luan to look at Xiao Chen. Her expression did not change in the slightest as she said, "Do I need to answer you?" Yun Luan's eyes were filled with indifference. It was like an elephant looking at an ant. Xiao Chen was naturally unhappy about this, but the most important thing now was to protect Gu Lingyao. Xiao Sheng would definitely not speak without thinking. However, just as Xiao Chen was thinking about this, Yun Luan spoke again. "It seems that you want to protect her, don't you? An eyesore." Her tone was indifferent and did not contain the slightest bit of emotion. As her voice fell, Yun Luan pointed out a finger and a silver-white light flashed. Seeing this, although Xiao Chen reacted immediately and crossed his arms in front of his chest, the terrifying power of Yun Luan's casual finger made Xiao Chen unable to resist at all. Like a kite with a broken string, Xiao Chen was directly sent flying. He fiercely slammed into the courtyard wall before falling to the ground. Seeing that Yun Luan had actually attacked without saying anything, Gu Lingyao's expression changed. She immediately ran towards Xiao Chen, but unfortunately, Yun Luan acted first. She grasped at the air and an irresistible force immediately bound Gu Lingyao's body. "What are you doing? Let me go. I don't even know you. Why are you hurting Big Brother Xiao Chen?" Knowing that she was no match for Yun Luan and did not even have the ability to resist, Gu Lingyao struggled as she angrily cursed. In response, Yun Luan said indifferently, "Because he's blocking my path. Also, you're just a vessel. Now that someone is taking back what belongs to them, you, as a vessel, naturally have no value." The reason Yun Luan attacked Xiao Chen was because Xiao Chen was blocking her path. As for Gu Lingyao, Yun Luan said that she was some vessel. Regarding this, Xiao Chen and Gu Lingyao were naturally confused. However, since things had already reached this point, Xiao Chen was even more certain that the Sacredine sect did not come with good intentions. Struggling to stand up, a cold light flashed in Xiao Chen's eyes. From the attack just now, Xiao Chen already knew that Yun Luan's strength was extremely powerful. It could even be said that she was terrifying. Looking at Yun Luan's appearance, she should be around the same age as him. However, Xiao Chen could not see through Yun Luan's cultivation. At the same time, facing Yun Luan, even though she did not emit the slightest fluctuation of spiritual energy, Xiao Chen still felt a sense of fear. Facing someone of the same generation, Xiao Chen actually felt fear. This was definitely the first time this had happened. He had already guessed that Yun Luan was most likely the Sacredine sect's holy maiden. Facing a holy maiden for the first time, Xiao Chen finally experienced the terror of a holy maiden. Indeed, it was as Xiao Sheng had said. The difference between him and a holy maiden was like the difference between heaven and earth. However, so what if she was a holy maiden? Yun Luan wanted to forcefully take Gu Lingyao away. Xiao Chen could not agree. He tightly clenched his teeth and spoke word by word. "So what if you're a holy maiden? Did I agree to take Lingyao away?" His voice was incomparably cold. However, Yun Luan only indifferently glanced at Xiao Chen and indifferently said, "I already said that you're an eyesore, right?" Saying this, Yunwan casually waved her hand and sent Xiaochen flying with a slap. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 664. Xiaochen was unable to fight back at all and was sent flying by the slap. This time, Yunwan used even more strength than before. Xiaochen crashed into the wall of the courtyard and was sent flying out of the courtyard. Dust flew everywhere. Yunwan had attacked Xiaochen twice in a row. Seeing this, Yifeng said coldly, "Saintess Yunwan, don't you think you've crossed the line? Even if you're from the Sacredine sect, you can't be so presumptuous in our Tianfengxing zone. This isn't the Sacredine state, but the ancient state." At this point, even an idiot could see that Yunwan's arrival was more of a disaster than a blessing for Guling Yao. Moreover, Yunwan had attacked Xiaochen, so Yifeng was naturally angry. However, Yunwan didn't seem to care about Yifeng's question. "He was the one who blocked my way. I've already been merciful by not killing him. What, does the Great Elder want to stop me as well? Humph, arrogant. Even if you're the saintess of the Sacredine sect, do you think no one in Tianfengxing zone can stop you?" Yifeng snorted. Yunwan was really too arrogant. Ever since she appeared, she hadn't put anyone in Tianfengxing zone in her eyes, including the Tianfeng saint. Although Yunwan was the saintess of the Sacredine sect, she was still too young. In Tianfengxing zone, let alone the Tianfeng saint, any half-saint elder could take her down. Hearing Yifeng's words, Yunwan smiled noncommittally. "What? You want to fight me? I admit that there are many people in Tianfengxing zone who can take me down, such as you. However, if you dare to attack me, I believe that the next one to come won't be a junior like me, but the saint of the Sacredine sect." She admitted that there were many people in Tianfengxing zone who could take her down, but would Tianfengxing zone dare to? Obviously, he wouldn't dare, unless Tianfengxing zone was crazy. Yifeng's expression turned extremely ugly when he heard Yunwan's words, but there was nothing he could do. It was at this moment that Yu Cheng, Lian Su, and the other personal disciples arrived one after another, perhaps because they had heard the commotion at Xiaochen's place. Looking at Yunwan and Guling Yao, as well as Xiaochen who had been sent flying by Yunwan, Yu Cheng and the others were puzzled. Who are these guys? She didn't seem to be from Tianfengxing zone. Yu Cheng and the others naturally didn't know Yunwan's identity. But at this moment, before Yu Cheng and the others could speak, Yunwan spoke first. "This is the direct disciple of Tianfengxing zone? You're just like an ant." Her words were full of contempt. Yu Cheng and the others' expressions changed drastically when they heard this. However, to everyone's surprise, not only did Yunwan humiliate Yu Cheng and the other personal disciples, she even attacked them directly. She pointed her finger at Yu Cheng and the others. Again, she casually pointed her finger and a silver-white light flashed by. The same scene happened again. Yu Cheng and the others were sent flying by Yunwan's finger without any ability to retaliate. Even Yu Cheng, Lian Su, and the other personal disciples couldn't block the attack. The four of them were sent flying at the same time, spitting out large mouthfuls of blood. She attacked again. Seeing this scene, Yifeng's face turned ashen. If it wasn't for his last bit of rationality, he probably wouldn't have been able to stop himself from attacking. She didn't treat the disciples of Tianfengxing zone as humans at all. Perhaps in Yunwan's eyes, the personal disciples of Tianfengxing zone were like dogs that she could trample on as she wished. Yunwan's arrogance was infuriating, but there was a fact that they had to admit. The personal disciples of Tianfengxing zone were like dogs in front of Yunwan. She could severely injure four of them with a single finger, which showed how big the gap between the two sides was. Yu Cheng and the other three were severely injured. Wang Zong, who rushed over, also appeared at this moment. Seeing Wang Zong, Yunwan pointed a finger again without saying a word. Seeing this, Wang Zong's face darkened. He reacted immediately by throwing out a punch, which collided with Yunwan's finger light. To everyone's surprise, Wang Zong actually managed to block Yun Luan's seemingly invincible finger attack. Yun Luan's eyes flashed with surprise, and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly as she said with interest, "I took it. Not bad, but it's a pity that you're in my way." Wang Zong was the first personal disciple of Tianfeng Xingzong. His strength was undoubtedly the strongest among the top 10 personal disciples. Following Yun Luan's words, Wang Zong didn't rejoice in the slightest. Even though he had successfully blocked Yun Luan's finger attack, Wang Zong had personally experienced Yun Luan's strength. Looking at Yun Luan with a serious gaze, this was the first time Wang Zong had such a serious expression. He muttered softly, "Saintess." Obviously, Wang Zong had also guessed Yun Luan's identity. However, what he received in response was Yun Luan's attack. This time, Yun Luan used a martial skill, but it was only a mere high-quality Earth-level martial skill. Facing that, Wang Zong did not dare to be careless in the slightest. He directly used his special skill, a high-quality heaven-level martial skill. The two fiercely collided, and with a muffled boom, Xiao Chen's entire courtyard was instantly razed to the ground. Wang Zong also spat out a mouthful of blood from this attack, and his body flew backwards. Wang Zong was also no match for Yun Luan. After dealing with Wang Zong, it could be said that Yun Luan had completely beaten up Tianfeng Xingzong's top 10 personal disciples with her own strength. Moreover, it was an absolute suppression. After dealing with Wang Zong, Yun Luan slowly walked up to Guling Yao. However, at this time, Guling Yao didn't pay attention to her at all. His eyes were red as he looked in the direction of Xiaochen. In the ruins, Xiaochen was covered in blood, and his bones seemed to have fallen apart. Even though his heart was filled with hatred, his body didn't listen to him at all, and he couldn't stand up. Yun Luan's attack just now had directly broken through his tempered battle body. He could clearly feel that Yun Luan's attack just now contained a trace of the power of laws. It was true that the tempered battle body was very strong, but with Xiao Chen's current cultivation and the mere first layer of the tempered battle body, he clearly couldn't block the attack of the power of laws. Following Guling Yao's gaze, Yun Luan naturally saw Xiao Chen lying in the ruins, and a trace of mockery flashed through her eyes. "He's your man, right? He's really too weak. Even as a vessel, it's a shame that you found such a weak man. Let me help you erase him." Yun Luan wanted to kill someone. Hearing this, Guling Yao's expression changed greatly. At the same time, Yun Luan had already stepped towards Xiao Chen. In the face of Yun Luan's approach, there was no fear in Xiao Chen's eyes. There was only a strong hatred and unwillingness. From Xiao Chen's eyes, Yun Luan could see the unwillingness and monstrous hatred in his heart. Yun Luan said indifferently, "The momentum of your desperate struggle is not bad, but unfortunately, I don't like the way you look at me, so you'd better die. Please add me to your collection, monthly vote, recommend me." End of chapter. Chapter 665. "So, it's better for you to die." As she spoke, Yun Luan was already prepared to attack. At the same time, Guling Yao's face was already covered in tears as she shouted, "Don't hurt brother Xiao Chen. I'll go with you." Guling Yao cried. Xiao Sheng, who was inside Xiao Chen's body, was also ready to attack. Although his saint soul didn't have much power left and would probably dissipate if he attacked again, Xiao Sheng didn't hesitate at all. If he didn't attack now, Xiao Chen would definitely die. It was impossible to rely on Tianfeng Xingzong. Whether it was Yifeng, the other half-saint elders, or the Tianfeng saint, they couldn't attack Yun Luan. Once they attacked, it would be the end of Tianfeng Xingzong. At this critical moment, a chuckle sounded from the top of Tianfeng Xingzong's mountain. "Yun Luan, you're still so violent. Do you want to kill someone just because of a disagreement? How are you going to get married in the future?" "Ha!" Yun Luan paused when she heard the voice. Taking advantage of this opportunity, a young man in a gray robe appeared in front of Xiao Chen and blocked Yun Luan's path. The young man's sudden appearance saved Xiao Chen's life. Seeing this, Xiao Sheng, who was ready to attack, let out a long sigh of relief and murmured softly, Looks like I made it in time. Xiaoxing obviously knew the young man's identity. To be precise, Xiaoxing didn't know the young man. What he recognized was the gray robe the young man wore. It was because of this robe that Xiaoxing recognized the young man's identity. The young man who appeared in time was called Qinyu. As for his identity, he was the same as Yunluan, but he was the holy son of the ancient saint sect. And why would Qinyu appear here? It was because the Tianfeng saint had asked the ancient sacred sect for help. Facing Yunluan, the Tianfeng Xingzong couldn't act against her, but the ancient sacred sect could. Not only that, the ancient sacred sect wasn't afraid of the Sacredine sect. In truth, the Tianfeng saint had been paying attention to everything the entire time. He had sent a request for help to the ancient sacred sect very early on, and after receiving the Tianfeng saint's request, the ancient sacred sect sent Qinyu, who possessed a similar status as Yunluan. Exhaling a mouthful of turbid air, Qinyu said with a cynical smile, "Looks like I made it in time. I say, Sister Yunluan, I think you need to change your bad habit of killing people at the drop of a hat. As a girl, can't you be a little gentler?" The two of them clearly knew each other. Hearing Qinyu's words, Yunluan's expression finally changed. She said with a slightly gloomy voice, "Qinyu, looks like the Tianfeng Xingzong really did ask for help from the ancient sacred sect. Fine, I'll give you some face and let that kid live." She instantly guessed that Qinyu had appeared here because the Tianfeng Xingzong had asked for help from the ancient sacred sect. Since Qinyu had stopped her, Yunluan clearly had no intention of continuing. The direct disciples of the Tianfeng Xingzong were all ants, but Qinyu wasn't. As soon as she finished speaking, Yunluan turned around and prepared to leave with Gu Lingyao. Yunluan's mission on this trip to the ancient sacred province was to bring Gu Lingyao back. The reason why so many things had happened was entirely because of Yunluan's insufferably arrogant personality. However, when Yunluan wanted to leave, no one saw Qinyu appear in front of Gu Lingyao. It was as if he had teleported. As Yunluan turned around, Qinyu had already appeared in front of Gu Lingyao. Once again, he shielded Gu Lingyao behind him and blocked Yunluan's path. The restriction on her body had been unlocked at some point. Finding that she had regained her ability to move, Gu Lingyao did not hesitate and directly ran towards Xiaochen. Seeing this, Yunluan did not stop her and allowed Gu Lingyao to pass by her. She glared at the smiling Qinyu and shouted, "Qinyu, what is the meaning of this?" Hearing Yunluan's cold shout, Qinyu replied indifferently, "It's nothing. It's just an order from the sect, just like you." Yunluan was here because of the sect's order to take Gu Lingyao away. Qinyu was also here because he had received an order from the sect to stop Yunluan from acting presumptuously in Tianfeng Xingzong. Both of them had received orders from the sect. Hearing this, Yunluan, who had an extremely domineering personality, was immediately enraged. She looked at Qinyu and shouted coldly, "Qinyu, if you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish." Saying this, Yunluan did not hesitate and directly struck out with her palm. This time, Yunluan did not hold back at all. The moment she struck out, it could be said that the weather changed. She directly used a heaven-level upper-grade martial skill. Wherever the palm print passed, even the space seemed to be unable to withstand the power and began to collapse inch by inch. Rich power of law surrounded the palm print. It was no exaggeration to say that compared to this attack, Yunluan's previous attacks were simply a drizzle. There was no comparison between the two at all. It was a complete display of the terrifying power of the saint and saintess. Seeing the eruption of Yunluan's attack, Yifeng did not dare to hesitate. With a wave of his hand, he immediately led Xiaochen, Gu Lingyao, Wang Zong, Yu Cheng, and the others away from the place. Xiaochen and the others could not withstand such a powerful attack at all. When the time came, just the aftermath alone would be enough to take their lives. In the blink of an eye, only Yunluan and Qinyu were left. Facing Yunluan's attack, Qinyu's smile did not diminish. "Sigh, I haven't seen you for 2 years. Junior sister Yunluan, your temper is still so irritable. It's rare for us to meet. Isn't it good to drink and chat?" Hearing this, Yunluan replied angrily, "Get lost. Who wants to drink and chat with you? Qinyu, if you dare to stop me, let's fight." The power of the battle between the saint and saintess was simply shocking. It was almost comparable to the existence of a half-step saint. It was hard to imagine that the saint and saintess of the younger generation could be so powerful. In the face of Yunluan's attack, Qinyu swept his leg out. He also used a heaven-rank martial skill. Wherever his leg passed, the ground was torn apart like a piece of paper. Cracks also appeared in the space. Moreover, a power of law that was not weaker than Yunluan's also surrounded the leg. Two soaring auras shot up into the sky from the direct disciples area. The hundreds of thousands of disciples in Tianfeng Zone were all staring at the scene. They did not know what was happening, but they could clearly feel that there were two chilling auras coming from the direct disciples area. Under the gaze of many disciples, there was a loud bang. Strong winds blew everywhere, and spiritual energy shot up into the sky. A powerful hurricane spread out from the direct disciples area. In just a few breaths' time, it swept across the entire Tianfeng sacred mountain. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 666. The battle between the two holy sons and holy daughters could not be said to be apocalyptic, but it was absolutely shocking. Following this head-on collision between Qinyu and Yunluan, the entire personal disciple area was almost razed to the ground. Because it was in the center, wherever the hurricane passed, the buildings collapsed and the talisman arrays collapsed. Even the core disciple area, which was closer to the direct disciple area, was not spared. Xiaoqian and the others, who had been brought away by Yifeng, gasped when they saw the scene before them. Is this the strength of the Holy Son and Holy Daughter? Yu Cheng and the others learned of Yunluan and Qinyu's identities from Yifeng. The two of them were around the same age as them, but their strength was worlds apart. This was the first time they had witnessed a battle between a chosen saint and a saintess. The shock they felt from the battle was indescribable. Previously, Yu Cheng and the others might still be proud of their identity as a direct disciple. However, after witnessing Yunluan and Qinyu's prowess, being a direct disciple was nothing but bullsh*t. It wasn't hard to see this when Yunluan single-handedly swept through all the direct disciples of the Heavenly Wind Sacred Sect. After the collision, as the dust slowly dissipated, Yunluan and Qinyu's figures once again appeared before everyone's eyes. The two of them did not seem to have suffered any injuries. The previous attack should have been evenly matched. Qinyu was still smiling mischievously, while Yunluan's face was filled with anger. Their eyes met, and Qinyu spoke first. I say, Yunluan, we don't have to continue fighting, right? It's hard to determine the victor anyway. Why don't you take your people and leave? Or come with me to the ancient sacred sect, and I'll treat you to a drink? The strength of the two of them could be said to be almost equal. If they did not take out their true trump cards and engage in a bloody battle to the death, it would really be difficult to determine a victor. However, when she heard Qinyu's suggestion, the fury in Yunluan's heart grew even stronger. However, she did not attack again. After all, what Qinyu said was the truth. Yunluan snorted coldly and took out a talisman from her storage ring. It was a projection talisman. It was not too rare, and its function was nothing more than to create a special image. Using this projection talisman, it could project images far away in the horizon and even transmit figures. However, the projected images were all illusory, which meant that they didn't have any attacking power. Seeing Yunluan take out a projection talisman, Qinyu naturally knew what she was going to do. He curled his lips and similarly took out a projection talisman and held it in his hand. Both of them were acting on orders from their respective sections. Since neither of them was willing to back down, they could only let the saints of their respective sects handle the matter. At the same time, they activated the projection talisman in their hands. Then, the two talismans slowly burned. A rectangular light screen that was 5 to 6 meters tall and 3 meters wide formed in front of the two of them. At the same time, different images appeared on the two light screens. On the light screen in front of Yunluan, a beautiful middle-aged woman in a silver moon robe appeared. On the light screen in front of Qinyu, a handsome young man appeared. Through the projection talisman, the two saints of the Sacredine sect and the ancient sacred sect met. The projection talisman was two-way. In other words, not only could Yunluan and Qinyu see the two saints through their images, but the two saints could also see everything that was happening in Tianfeng Zone through the projection. When the images were formed, the beautiful middle-aged woman first looked at Gu Lingyao, who was standing beside Yifeng. Then, she turned her gaze to the young man in the projection and revealed a beautiful smile on her face. Saint Qingju. The young man was a saint of the ancient sacred sect. His name was Qingju. Hearing the beautiful woman's words, Saint Qingju smiled faintly. Saint Red Lotus, isn't your Sacredine sect a little overstepping the boundaries of my ancient sacred state? The beautiful woman's name was Red Lotus. She was a saint of the Sacredine sect. As soon as she spoke, Saint Qingju spoke bluntly and glanced at Qinyu. Seeing this, Qinyu spread out his hands and said with an expression that said it was none of his business. Lord Sacred Master, I have no choice. Yunluan doesn't listen to my advice. I can't beat her, so I can only let you saints negotiate among yourselves. In just a few words, Qinyu had pushed all the responsibility away. As if he knew Qinyu's character, Saint Qingju did not say much and looked at Saint Red Lotus again. Seeing this, Saint Red Lotus still had a charming smile on her face. Qingju, at this moment, my Sacredine sect will naturally give your ancient sacred sect an explanation. However, our Sacredine sect must take Gu Lingyao away. The meaning of Saint Red Lotus's words was clear. Sacredine sect could take responsibility for everything that happened today and even compensate them. However, Gu Lingyao and the others must be taken away. Saint Qingju smiled when he heard Saint Red Lotus's words. Oh, what if I say no? Then I'll have to personally make a trip to the ancient Saint Plain, the Red Lotus Saint replied without any hesitation. For the sake of Gu Lingyao, Saint Red Lotus did not hesitate to come personally. Saint Qingju's eyes flashed with surprise, but soon, he seemed to have thought of something and his expression changed. This little girl, could it be? Saint Qingju guessed something, but before he could finish, Saint Red Lotus interrupted him. Since you've guessed it, you should know that my Sacredine sect will not give in on this matter. Gu Lingyao must return to Sacredine sect. Other than that, everything else can be discussed. Red Lotus Saint interrupted Saint Qingju's words, but it also confirmed Saint Qingju's guess. After making up his mind, Saint Qingju also knew that this matter was very important to the Sacredine sect. It was impossible for the Sacredine sect to give in. If things went wrong, the Sacredine sect might really invade the ancient sacred state. Saint Qingju said without much hesitation after slightly lowering his voice. If that's the case, let Yunluan take the little girl away. Ah, then I'll thank you. Don't worry, my Sacredine sect will bear all the responsibility for today's matter. Sacredine sect will compensate Tianfeng Zone double for all the losses. Saint Qingju agreed to let Sacredine sect take away Gu Lingyao, and Saint Red Lotus also promised to compensate Sacredine sect double for their losses. The two saints reached a consensus, but Xiao Chen's expression was extremely ugly. In the current situation, Xiao Chen or Tianfeng Zone could only rely on Sacredine sect. Now that Sacredine sect had agreed to let Sacredine sect take away Gu Lingyao, wouldn't there be no room for negotiation? Without any hesitation, Xiao Chen knew very well that he could only rely on the power of the ancient sacred clan. As such, he ignored Yifeng and immediately shouted, "Wait a minute." Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.